Chapter 949. What Miss Xiao Xiao said was not something shocking in Ba. Almost all the gangs in Ba, big and small, had done this kind of thing before. The killers weren't necessarily evil, and the victims weren't necessarily kind or innocent. It was just a rule of the underworld that big fish preyed on small fish and small fish preyed on shrimps. It was just like how some village chiefs drowned people who broke the rules of the village. People would only be afraid of you if you were more ruthless than others. This was the philosophy of survival in Ba. Miss Wei Xiao Xiao had done such a thing when she was 13. She was different from Gu Zhuting, who had also killed people when she was 13. Gu Zhuting had snuck into a military governor's office at the age of 13 and taken the head of a powerful military governor. Miss Xiao Xiao, on the other hand, had her skirt dirted by a beggar with both legs when she was 13. Miss Xiao Xiao ordered her men to drown the beggar in the Wei River. The gangs that came to pay their condolences disapproved of her arrogant attitude. The people from the gangs that were even more powerful than the Heavenly Eagle Gang were glaring at them with hostility. The two deputy leaders of the Flood Dragon Union and a few stewards looked displeased. Wei Yongtang frowned and turned to his daughter. "Shut up. There are so many seniors here. Do you think you have the right to speak?" Wei Yongtang turned to Li He and asked calmly, "What do you plan to do?" The Heavenly Eagle Gang and the Flood Dragon Gang are willing to advance and retreat together and help each other. Yan Sherwei was now the leader of the Flood Dragon Gang. But Wei Yongtang also knew that the real power of the Flood Dragon Gang was in Yan Sherwei's hands. He was asking for the real leader. Yan Sherwei was repeatedly ignored by others, and his heart was very depressed. The words of the person who broke into his mansion last night were even more lingering in his heart. Li He cupped his hands at Wei Yongtang calmly and said, "Gang leader Wei, you're helping us. The Flood Dragon Gang is very grateful. We have our own plans for this. If we need help from the Heavenly Eagle Gang in the future, I, Li He, will ask for your help." Once his father-in-law arrived, Wenbin's courage grew by a lot, and he immediately shouted, "What plan? I don't like what Master He said. I've long said that we should destroy the Shun sect immediately. It was you who were afraid of the slightest thing and refused to act. Now that we have my father-in-law's support, what do we have to be afraid of? The Shun sect only has that bitch who can fight. We have so many heroes on Ba. Are we going to submit to her just like that? How can you speak to your elders like this?" Wei Yongtang put on the airs of an elder and reprimanded Wenbin. Originally, he had intended to form a strong alliance with the Water Dragon Triad. Now that when Chongqing was dead, his desire to form a marriage alliance became even stronger. He knew very well what kind of person his son-in-law was. Wenbin was strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. Other than being able to speak flowery words in front of women, he had no other ability. As long as his daughter married him, although the Flood Dragon Triad still had the name of the Flood Dragon Triad, it would actually belong to the Heavenly Eagle Triad. At that time, the two triad would be united, and he would be able to become a first-class triad in one fell swoop. He would be able to stand on equal footing with the Life League, Five Elements Triad, Three Rivers Triad, Circle Sect, and Peace Triad. Wei Yongtang reprimanded his son-in-law and said to Li He with a smile, "What Master He said makes sense. Then let's deal with President Wen's funeral first. Anyway, he can't run away from the Shun sect. Isn't it just a matter of a word for us to get justice?" However, Wei Yongtang glanced at the crowd and said with authority, "A country can't be without a ruler, and a triad can't be without a leader. Now that President Wen has passed away, shouldn't we immediately ask young Master Wen to take over the position in front of President Wen's memorial tablet? This way, we can offer a memorial to President Wen's spirit in heaven and tell him not to worry." Li He was silent for a moment. He looked at Yan Sherwei and said slowly, "Of course." Just as Wei Yongtang's lips curled into a smile, Li He said again, "However, our Vice President Jun has gone to the city. We should wait for him to come back before we discuss such an important matter. For now, let's deal with President Wen's funeral first. Wei Yongtong's smile froze on his lips. If he wanted to help young Master Wen ascend to the position, he naturally had to have the important people in the association present to be a form of acknowledgement. Others could be absent, but the 3 deputy gang masters had to be present. However, Li He said to wait for Jun Rian to come back before discussing, not to hold an ascension ceremony for Wen Bin after he came back. Discuss? What else was there to discuss? The leaders of the triads, sitting on both sides of the seats, immediately sensed the strangeness in Li Hei's words. They couldn't help but look curious. A quick-witted person immediately came up with an idea. Could it be that when Changxing's sudden death had nothing to do with the smooth door, but the internal strife of the Flood Dragon Union? This was interesting. If the Flood Dragon Union really had internal strife and split up, this fat piece of meat was even more tempting than the smooth door. All the triad leaders who had confidence in taking over the divided Flood Dragon Union or could get a share of the pie unconsciously began to think about it. When Jun Rian arrived at the Chang and local government office, a runner immediately led him to the record military advisor Chu Tianqing's office. Jun Rian had an official rank and often went in and out of the local government office. He had bribed everyone and would even give him red packets during the New Year. Therefore, no one would make things difficult for him when he went in and out of the place. The record military advisor of the Chang and local government office was a person of high status and power. In the supervision system of the Tang dynasty, the central supervision system included the censorate, and the feudal officials. The local supervision system was made up of the inspector and the record military advisor. The record military advisor was in charge of the masses, Chao Wenba, and he was in charge of good and evil. It was a combination of the political and legal committee and the disciplinary committee. Chu Tianqing, who was in charge of the judicial discipline in Chang, and was slightly plump with white hair, light eyebrows, narrow eyes, bald sideburns, and Buddha-like lips. He looked like an extremely loyal elder. He did not look like a military officer, but more like a good-tempered Confucian classics instructor in the Imperial College. Only his colleagues who were familiar with him knew that this person, who always looked like a good person, was actually a cruel and merciless person. The officials of the Tang dynasty were used to giving people nicknames. Chu Tianqing's nickname was Vulture. He didn't have an aquiline nose or sharp eagle eyes, and his appearance was nothing like a vulture's. This nickname described his behavior and character. He was like a vulture crouching on a cliff, motionless as if he was part of the rock. Only when its prey was completely defenseless or on the verge of collapsing would it suddenly spread its wings and pounce over, using its sharp claws to hold onto the prey, and then using its sharp beak to peck open the prey skin, pecking at the flesh and sucking blood. Jun Rian followed the Yamen runner inside, thinking about how to tell Chu Tianqing what had happened, even though the two matters were combined into one. But whether he should first inquire about the background of the niece of the Shun sect's Qiao Bangzhu or first talk about the inexplicable death of President Wen, he had to carefully ponder over how to explain it in an orderly manner. Duke Xiaolian is here. Come, don't stand on ceremony. Chu Tianqing was bent over a pile of official desks. As soon as he saw Jun Rian, he immediately stood up with a smile, as if he was blessed by the heavens. Although the record military advisor looked easy to talk to, Jun Rian, who was familiar with his character, didn't dare to be careless. She quickly stood still and bowed deeply. The Yamen runner who had led the way retreated. As soon as the figure disappeared from the door, Chu Tianqing's face changed and became very cold. Jun Rian had just sat down, but when she saw Chu Tianqing's expression, she quickly stood up again, feeling uneasy. Chu Silu, today I'm here. Chu Tianqing hurriedly waved his hand and interrupted her, then hurried to the door. Jun Rian closed her mouth in surprise and looked at Chu Tianqing's strange behavior. Chu Tianqing flashed to the door, looked outside, closed the door, and quickly returned. He waved to Jun Rian and whispered, Come, Let's talk in the inner room. Yes, yes. June Ruyan couldn't help but panic when she saw Chu Tianqing's expression as if he was facing a formidable enemy. She quickly followed Chu Tianqing into the inner room. This inner room was where Chu Tianqing temporarily rested when he was tired from official business. There was a group of low cabinets against the wall, a soft couch in the room, and nothing else. Chu Tianqing stood still in the inner room and whispered to June Ruyan, "You don't have to say anything more. I already know why you're here. Chong, and is going to have a great change. A great change. Don't do anything at this time. Anything you do could be wrong." June Ruyan said hesitantly, "Chu Silu, the Flood Dragon Society." Chu Tianqing raised a hand to stop her and said, "You and I are different from those outlaws of the Flood Dragon Society. We're just providing them with some convenience and benefits. Without the Flood Dragon Society, as long as we're willing, the other gangs will still treat us as distinguished guests. The Flood Dragon Society is too arrogant, and this disaster is inevitable. June Xiaolian, don't recklessly rush up at this time. I'm warning you, the waters are deep, and even I don't know the bottom. Don't get involved. When things calm down, do you think we'll miss out on benefits? Now, just sweep away the snow in front of your own door, and don't worry about the frost on other people's houses." June Ruyan said in surprise, "Chu Silu already knows about President Wen's death." Chu Tianqing was stunned and turned pale. "What did you say? You said Wen Chongqing is dead? When did he die? How did he die?" June Ruyan was also stunned. Chu Tianqing didn't know that Wen Chongqing was dead? Then why was he acting like he was facing a great enemy? June Ruyan didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly told Chu Tianqing about Wen Chongqing's death in detail. She also told him about how the Flood Dragon Society had sent out 200 experts in an attempt to swallow the Shun sect in one fell swoop, only to be utterly defeated by a village girl who had appeared out of nowhere. Chu Tianqing lightly slapped his forehead and paced back and forth in the room, muttering to himself, "They've already made their move? How decisive! Something big is really going to happen." June Ruyan looked at him anxiously and couldn't help but ask, "Chu Silu, what happened?" Right now, just as he was hesitating whether or not to tell Chu Tianqing about the news of someone breaking into his house last night, Chu Tianqing suddenly turned around and said to him, "If Wen Chongqing is dead, then so be it. This is just the beginning. Following this, there will be major events that neither you nor I can predict. You have to stay out of this immediately, or I'll be dragged down by you and doomed eternally." Chapter 950. June Ruyan's hair stood on end as she listened. Trembling with fear, she said, "Chu Silu, Ba is just a group of poor people who rely on water to make a living. Is there a need to make such a big fuss over such a small benefit? What kind of big shot has taken a liking to Ba that even you are afraid of him?" Chu Tianqing sneered and said, "Afraid? Afraid my ass. Do I deserve to be afraid? If I'm really unlucky, it won't be because someone wants to deal with me, but because I was too slow to dodge and got caught in the crossfire. Let me tell you, right now I can't wait to run far away if not for—" As if fearing that the walls might have ears, Chu Tianqing subconsciously looked around and said in a low voice, "If it weren't for the fact that I'm the War Records Advisor and there are some things that I can't avoid, I wouldn't even be qualified to know about it if they hadn't informed me in advance." June Ruyan knew Chu Tianqing's character very well. He was not the kind of person who would make a fuss over nothing. If he could make it sound so serious, then the truth must be even more serious than what he had revealed. June Ruyan couldn't help but jump in fright, but he couldn't figure it out. Ba's benefits were extremely generous to them, but they shouldn't be attractive to higher-level nobles. What had happened? Chu Tianqing seemed to see his confusion and said with a wry smile, "Don't ask me. It's not that I don't want to tell you, but I don't know either. I don't know what kind of big shot has taken a liking to Ba, nor do I know what his goal is, nor do I know what kind of means he wants to use." Chu Tianqing sighed and said, "In the eyes of an ant, a blade of grass is a tree. A rock is a mountain that's impossible to climb, and a small stream is an ocean that's impossible to cross. In its field of vision, how can it see what a real tree looks like and how tall a real mountain is? Jun Ryan was dumbfounded. In his eyes, the captain of the Chong and department was already crouching on a high cliff, looking down on all living things like a vulture, but he described himself as an ant walking in the crevices of a rock. An inexplicable chill suddenly struck his heart. Jun Ryan said in a trembling voice, "Chu Silu, then what should I do now?" Chu Tianqing said fiercely, "If it weren't for the fact that we're in the same boat, I wouldn't have revealed anything to you. Even if you've heard it, you have to bury it in your stomach and never say a word to anyone. Otherwise, before others can grind you into fine powder, I'll take your little life first." Jun Ryan shuddered and said repeatedly, I know, then Chu Tianqing said word by word, "I'm leaving the Flood Dragon Union. From now on, I won't be seeing any guests. This is the only way to avoid disaster." Jun Ryan's heart skipped a beat, but when she thought of the generous income she got from the Flood Dragon Union every month, she was reluctant to part with it. She said hesitantly, "Then when can we?" Chu Tianqing said in a stern voice, "Bastard, are you willing to sacrifice your life over your wealth? If the situation had calmed down, would I not have told you? If I can't even protect myself in this storm, what else do you expect? Get lost and go home immediately. Even if the sky falls and the earth collapses, you won't care." Chu Silu, who held a high position in the Chong and local government, was actually most worried about whether he could survive this unknown storm. Jun Ryan couldn't imagine what kind of storm this would be, but he finally understood one thing. If Chu Silu was just an ant in this storm, then he was not even a fart. Jun Ryan agreed repeatedly and stumbled out, only one thought lingering in his mind: avoid the door and don't see any guests. Only by doing this can I avoid disaster. In the Shihua house, red dresses fluttered, wide sleeves fluttered, and the music became decadent. After 3 rounds of wine, all the guests became unrestrained. Wu Yizong's admonition on the opposite building became a great joke amidst the music and dancing. Wu Yizong had already hurriedly ended the banquet with an ashen face. At this moment, the opposite building was empty, and Chen Dong and the others were even more unrestrained. Sitting next to Shiger was a golden-haired girl with a high bun. She had a pair of sapphire blue eyes and a jade-like nose bridge. Her 2 voluptuous peaks were especially eye-catching under her half-open shirt, which looked like piles of snow. However, Censor sure sat there, as if he didn't see such a bright and dazzling beauty next to him. He was in very low spirits. Yang Fan smiled and raised his cup to him, saying, "Brother Shi, please have a drink." Shi Yu was deep in thought when he heard this. He quickly raised his cup and squeezed out a smile, half-heartedly returning a toast to Yang Fan. Yang Fan smiled and said, "What? Brother Shi isn't satisfied with this beauty next to you." Shi Yu hurriedly waved his hand and said, No, Erling, don't think too much. It's just that I'm a little tired after such a long journey." Yang Fan laughed and said, "Brother Shi is in the prime of his life. Look at Hu Yuan and Brother Qin. These 2 old men are in high spirits. They haven't even said they're tired, so why are you tired?" At this moment, Qin Dong was buried in the full bosom of a beauty that could suffocate a man to death. He was kissing 2 red grapes, making the beauty giggle endlessly. Hu Yuanli, on the other hand, was already 80% drunk. His eyes were blank, and he sat there swaying like an urn that couldn't be tipped over. His cheeks were full of red lipstick marks. Shi Yu laughed bitterly and shook his head slightly. At this moment, Censor withdrew his hand from the back skirt of an enchanting beauty and said with a smile, "Erlang, you don't know this. Brother Shi likes dignified and gentle women. Although these beauties are enchanting, they may not be to his taste." Shi Yu frowned, but Yang Fan smiled and said, "What's so difficult about that? It's not like the Shihua house is full of prostitutes." Beauties, hurry up and help our brother Sure choose a dignified, gentle, and talented woman who is proficient in poetry. Beside Yong Fan was a woman wearing a silk gown as thin as a cicada's wing. She was one of the beauties who was dancing on the stage. After the dance, she changed her clothes and came to serve Yong Fan. This beauty had an oval face, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a pretty face. She looked like she was only 16 or 17 years old. Her smile was very sweet. But in terms of figure, no 17 or 18 years old girl from the Central Plains could compare to her. She was wearing a colorful, tight-fitting bra that wrapped around her full bosom. Her snow-white skin was translucent, and her cleavage was deep. If she was a girl from the Central Plains, she would have to be a mature woman in her early 30s. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her to have such a soul-stirring, hot body. This little beauty understood Chinese. As soon as Yong Fan finished talking, he lightly slapped her on the buttocks. The little beauty giggled and gracefully stood up. In just a moment, the little beauty returned with a woman wearing a silk gown with narrow sleeves and a long skirt. She had a colorful embroidered silk draped over her shoulders. This woman's appearance was not very outstanding, but she had a scholarly air about her. She did not look like a prostitute, but more like a lady from a respectable family. She was in her 20s, and in the famous brothel of Pinkong Lane, she was considered old. The little beauty of the woman was holding onto the woman's arm and pointed at Yu's back. She giggled and returned to Yong Fan's side. She sat next to him, grabbed his arm, and placed it on her trembling bosom. Yu frowned slightly. He still refused. No, no, no. I appreciate your kindness, but I am really not in the mood today. Ah, stop right there. While Felicitous Rain was talking, he suddenly let out a loud roar, scaring Chin Dong, who was lying between the two jade peaks and sniffing around like a puppy. He raised his head abruptly. Hu Yuanli and Sun Yuxuan also staggered and stared at Felicitous Rain with their eyes wide open. Yu leaped up from his seat and quickly pounced forward. He grabbed the elegant woman who was covering her face and trying to leave. He pulled away the hands that were covering her face. His face immediately twisted. He gritted his teeth and roared, "It's you! It's you! It's you! It's really you!" The woman panicked. She quickly shook her head and said, "It's not me, it's not me. Dear customer, you have mistaken me for someone else?" Yu's expression was ferocious. He said, "Mistaken me for someone else? I will recognize you even if you turn into ashes. Miss Dian, you have deceived me so much. You have deceived me so much." Yong Fan looked at them with an amused expression. The little Hu Ji, who was clinging to him like a little bird, giggled and said, "This dear customer seems to know our sister, Dian. Yong Fan smiled and said, "She is called Dian? Dian as in Saijian or Dian as in Qijian." The little Hu Ji giggled and said, Yes, it is Dian as in Qijian. Sister, Dian's skill in bed is very good, but..." She glanced at Yong Fan with a pair of enchanting blue eyes. She moved closer to his ear and said in a soft voice, "My skill in serving men is not worse than hers. Pretty man, you will know in a moment." At this time, Censor tightly grabbed the girl who had a panicked expression and denied that she was the girl who had tricked him in Dan Province. He gritted his teeth and his expression was ferocious. He was so angry that it seemed like he wanted to tear her into pieces. However, he was born a scholar and had strict rules since he was young. He had never hit a woman. Therefore, even though he was mad with hatred, he could only stare at the girl until her face turned red. He did not know how to punish her in order to vent the anger in his heart. Yong Fan got up and walked over. He put his arm around Yu's shoulder and said with a smile, "Brother sure seems to have met an old friend here. Come, let's talk here." Yong Fan held him and walked to a corner of the parlor. He then turned around and signaled the panic-stricken girl to wait there and not move. When they reached a corner of the parlor, Yong Fan lowered his voice and gently persuaded, "Brother Shi, the past is the past. Speaking of which, Dian Dian was ordered by someone else and had no choice. She is not related to you. So who else would she trap if not you? If I am not wrong, ever since you returned from Dan province, Brother Sure, I am afraid that you have not forgotten this girl, right? Haha, whether it is love or hate, it is all fate. Today, I will be an ice man and redeem this girl's freedom. I will give her to you as a concubine. From now on, she can be considered to have jumped out of the mortal world and will no longer be manipulated by others. How about you? Ask her to serve you for the rest of her life as compensation. How about that? When Sure Yu heard this, a chill ran down his spine all the way to the tip of his hair. He had goosebumps all over his body and stood there in a daze. Chapter 9:51. Sure Yu was dumbstruck. Yang Fan patted his shoulder and said in a low voice, "The trip to Chang and is a good opportunity for Brother Sure. If you can make a great contribution now, do you think you won't be able to rise to the top in the future? As far as I know, Imperial Censor of the Left, Wang Changfeng, is old and ill. I'm afraid he will retire soon. Brother Sure, think about it carefully." Yang Fan finished speaking and turned to leave. Sure Yu stood there in a daze for a long time, not knowing what to do. Back then, he had rushed to Danzhou in high spirits with the intention of solving a major case and competing for the position of Imperial Censor of the Right. Who would have thought that he would be seduced by Lady Mingdian, who pretended to be a merchant's wife? As a result, he fell into the hands of Danzhou's provincial governor, Li Junfeng. He didn't dare to investigate the Danzhou case anymore. When the Yenzhou case implicated Danzhou, Li Junfeng still fell into the net of the law. However, the scandal of Imperial censorship Yu hadn't been exposed. In Sure Yu's opinion, Li Junfeng definitely hadn't confessed to the crime of framing him. After all, just based on the crime of embezzling grain from the Danzhou treasury, he was only exiled to Lingnan. If he confessed to another crime, he might be executed. Sure Yu had thought that this scandal would sink into the depths of the sea and no one would ever know about it. He hadn't expected Yang Fan to expose it today. Imperial Censor suddenly remembered that when the corrupt officials in Yenzhou had been arrested, the court had followed the clues and arrested many important local officials. Danzhou's provincial governor, Li Junfeng, had been arrested by Yang Fan. Could it be that provincial governor Li had actually confessed, but Yang Fan had concealed this information? Thinking of this, Imperial Censor Shure's face turned red. But thinking deeper, Imperial Censor Shure couldn't help but tremble with fear. Why did Yang Fan help him conceal this scandal? And why did he reveal this matter to him today? When he had been hit by the immortal trap, he had thought that Lady Mingdian was really Provincial Governor Li's concubine. Only when Provincial Governor Li was arrested did he realize that she was just a prostitute that Provincial Governor Li had hired with a large sum of money. However, he didn't know where this prostitute had come from, nor did he dare to ask. Now, this woman had appeared in the Silk Flower House. Was this a coincidence, or was it a deliberate arrangement by Yang Fan? If it was a deliberate arrangement, then Yang Fan's use of both carrot and stick was to, for a moment. Sure Yu's mind was filled with thoughts. He did not know how many thoughts had crossed his mind. Suddenly, he thought of the sentence that made his heart palpitate. Imperial Censor Wang Changfeng of the Zuoqindu was about to retire due to illness. Yang Fan walked to the side and said a few words to the girl. When the girl heard that Yang Fan wanted to redeem her, she couldn't help but be surprised and happy, but then she was filled with fear. Most people who had fallen into prostitution had no choice but to do so. Who wouldn't want to have someone to rely on? And the best ending for a prostitute was to be taken in as a concubine by a court official. She was already 24 years old, which was considered too old for a brothel. She also wasn't a peerless beauty. To be able to become the concubine of a current imperial censor was the best way out. But this imperial censor had been scammed by her before. Even though she was only a prostitute and did things for money, it wasn't up to her to choose. But would this imperial censor understand her difficulties? If he harbored hatred in his heart, when the time came, Wouldn't he be able to trample on Jami, abuse and oppress her? To be able to have such a good way out, the girl really couldn't bear to part with it. But when she thought of the enmity she had formed with the imperial censor, she was really extremely afraid. If only she could become the concubine of a handsome young master. Helpless, the girl couldn't help but feel an indescribable hidden bitterness towards Yang Fan. Yang Fan saw her worry and whispered a few more words in her ear. He first said a few words about the imperial censor's temperament, which was to ease people's hearts. The following words made the girl blush. She nodded her head shyly and stole a glance at the imperial censor, who was standing rooted to the ground. She gathered her courage and walked towards him. Yang Fan smiled and said, "The imperial censor's body is tired. Miss Dian, you have to serve him well. Tomorrow morning, you will pack your luggage and leave with the imperial censor." The imperial censor didn't bring his family with him this time. From now on, you will have to take care of his food and drink. The girl didn't dare to raise her head and shyly agreed in a low voice. Yang Fan then said to Qindong, Hu Yuanli and the others, "It's getting late. Let's all rest here for the night." Everyone had drunk enough. The fire of passion was gradually aroused, but in front of a large crowd it was inconvenient for them to show their wanton and unrestrained behavior. Yang Fan's words won the hearts of the people. Everyone responded one after another, each holding a beauty in their arms and swaying away. Little Hu Ji came in front of Yang Fan and stared at him with a pair of watery blue eyes. She was like a little puppy waiting for its owner to throw a bone at it. She was just short of wagging her tail. However, Yang Fan pushed her towards Qindong, who was swaying in front of him. He smiled and said, "You go too. Take good care of our brother Qin." Compared to the plump Dr. Qin, who was over 50 years old, it was obvious that little Hu Ji was more interested in the young, strong, and handsome Lang Lang. Little Hu Ji could not help but feel resentful when she heard this. Qindong, on the other hand, was overjoyed. He hugged little Hu Ji's shoulder and gave Yang Fan a thumbs up. He stammered, "Lang, you're a good friend. I didn't make the wrong friend." The song ended and everyone dispersed. The reception hall was a mess. A few people, including the imperial censor, left with one or two attractive girls in their arms. Only Yang Fan was left sitting there quietly. Ren Wei, who was dressed in casual clothes, quietly came up to him. Yang Fan raised his head and said, "Let's go to the North City first and take a look at the situation of the 1,000 horsemen camp. After that, we'll go to Bashang." Naturally, someone stayed behind to handle the banquet and to handle the matters of redeeming the girl. Yang Fan, on the other hand, left the Shihua house with a few trusted imperial guards and galloped towards the North City. The girl's boudoir was just like her. It was warm and elegant. An embroidered tent was laid out and the fragrance of beasts lingered in the air. The girl looked timidly at the imperial censor who she would serve for the rest of her life. She was at a loss as to what to do. The imperial censor had drunk a lot of wine at the banquet. His face was flushed. Looking at the woman in front of him, whom he hated and loved and could never forget, the imperial censor gritted his teeth and roared, "Strip!" The young lady was startled and quickly pulled off her clothes, quickly stripping herself into a naked little lamb. Her two hands did not know whether to cover the top or the bottom. Just as she was panicking, the imperial censor was burning with lust. He hugged her and threw himself onto the bed, turning all the grievances in his heart into action. Back when she was dressed as a merchant's wife, she had to pretend to be reserved and dignified. She did not dare to let loose and get intimate with the imperial censor. This time, she sincerely wanted to please her Langjun. Naturally, she gave it her all and served the imperial censor until he was on cloud 9. Her gums chattered and she moaned. It looked like the two of them were going to die together to settle their scores. The Tang dynasty had a palace in both the east and west. The north gate of the palace was called the Xuanwu Gate. Luoyang only had one Xuanwu Gate, but Chang'an had two. One of the two Xuanwu Gates in Chang and was the north gate of the palace, and the other was the north gate of the Daming Palace. Before the year of Jingguan, the imperial family continued to expand along the west side of the palace and built the grand Daming Palace. Its size was not inferior to the palace. Just the Daming Palace alone was equivalent to 4.5 times the size of the Forbidden City of the Qing dynasty. One could imagine how vast it was. The north gate of the Daming Palace was called the Xuanwu Gate. The Xuanwu Gate of the palace and the Xuanwu Gate of the Daming Palace both led directly to the inner court of the palace. Therefore, these two Xuanwu gates were the most important gates in the palace and had to be guarded by the 1,000 horseman battalion. Now that the entire imperial family was in Luoyang, there was no need for strict security in the palace. The task of guarding the 1,000 horseman battalion was relatively easy. Yang Fan told Su Liang and the others to take the opportunity to take people to familiarize themselves with the roads and rooms in the palace. In addition, they had to choose a site for the camp. The original site of the imperial army was located in the most critical part of the north side of the palace. It blocked the main road to the north of the palace. However, at that time, there was only 100 horsemen. They only guarded the Xuanwu Gate of the palace. The other defense was handed over to the other troops of the Northern Yamen Imperial Army. According to Yang Fan, now that the 1,000 horseman battalion had enough manpower, the entire north side of the palace must be under their absolute control. Therefore, the scope of the military camp had to be expanded. With the moat outside the north side of the city as the boundary, the entire north side was under the control of the 1,000 horseman battalion. In this way, if any imperial army wanted to enter the palace from the north side, they had to pass through the defense of the 1,000 horseman battalion. Therefore, they had to be one step ahead to delimit the scope of the barracks and send troops to guard it. It was expected that Wu Yizong would not dare to argue with them in such a sensitive place. Yang Fan rode his horse and patrolled outside the north side of the city. He confirmed the scope that Su Liang, Ma Qiao, and the others had already delimit. He told a few trusted subordinates some things to pay attention to, and then left quietly. Only Sima Xuliang and a few Lang generals knew that Yang Fan was not in the camp. Although they knew that Yang Fan had left the military camp, they did not know where he went. Even Yang Fan's sworn brother Ma Qiao did not know. This place had become the defense of the 1,000 horseman battalion. Naturally, others could not find out whether Yang Fan was here or not. When Yang Fan came back, he was dressed in casual clothes. At this time, he left quietly without even changing his clothes. He quietly went to Shangba. The Xuanwu Gate was to the north of the palace. The palace was to the north of the entire Chang'an city, but Shangba was to the southeast of Chang'an city. If Yang Fan wanted to go to Shangba, he would have to cross the entire Chang'an city. At this time, Junrian was causing another uproar in Bahang town. Although the Flood Dragon Society did not say why Junrian went to Chang'an city today, everyone knew that he was the branch leader of the Chao gang. Since the Flood Dragon Society was in such a big trouble, he would definitely return to the city to explain the current situation to the officials who supported the Flood Dragon Society. He might also want to know more about the Shun Gate. However, Junrian did not return. Only 2 of his trusted bodyguards came back with a piece of news. Vice President Jun suffered a stroke. According to the 2 bodyguards, when Vice President Jun returned from the city, he suddenly fell unconscious from a stroke when he was about to leave the city gate. Therefore, he was sent to the old mansion in the city to be treated by a doctor. Before the vice president of the Flood Dragon Society, the chief steward, and the guests who came to pay their respects could digest this news, the 2 bodyguards brought the eldest lady of the Jun family back to the city. With such a big thing happening to Junrian, it was normal for his wife to return to the city to take care of him. But later, everyone realized that Junrian's people had emptied the Jun family's house in Shangba. They did not keep a single valuable item and moved it all back to the city. If Junrian was paralyzed in bed, then he would indeed lose the possibility of being the branch leader of the Chao gang. The June family would have to move out of Bahang town sooner or later. But was there a need to be so impatient? June Ruyan had suffered a stroke, who had instructed the eldest lady of the June family to immediately move all the properties in Bahang town. The Flood Dragon Society, which was already in a state of panic, was plunged into even greater turmoil. Chapter 952. When Li He and Yen Sherwei heard the news, they immediately rushed to the city. They met the June family's carriage on the way, but they didn't even greet them and rushed to the June family's residence first. June Ruyan was indeed paralyzed in bed, his mouth crooked and eyes slanted, and saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth. They couldn't ask a word because he couldn't say anything other than moaning. June Ruyan was also a ruthless person, since Chu Silu said, "Avoid the door and don't meet outsiders. This is the only way to avoid disaster." He simply carried it out more thoroughly and became a disabled person who couldn't speak or move. Even if someone came to see him, they wouldn't be able to dig a word out of his mouth. Unfortunately, June Ruyan only knew a little about the symptoms after a stroke. He had never seen a stroke patient with his own eyes. Li He and Yen Sherwei, on the other hand, were knowledgeable. Although June Ruyan tried his best to act, he was not a good actor. Li He and Yen Sherwei could still see some clues from his eyes and the unnatural expression that he tried to twist. They were all experienced people and didn't point out that June Ruyan was pretending to be crazy. It was obvious that June Ruyan wouldn't admit it, so there was no need to do so. After a while, the June family's wife, Miao Ching also hurried back. When she saw her husband was paralyzed from the stroke, she immediately collapsed in front of the bed and cried. She had only married June Ruyan for a month, and this happened. If June Ruyan didn't recover, he would be a widow for the rest of his life. How could she not be sad? Yen Sherwei and Li He looked at the June family's wife, who was crying so hard that she almost fainted. They could see that the June family's wife wasn't acting. That was to say, June Ruyan had pretended to have a stroke. Up until now, even his lover was kept in the dark and didn't dare to reveal the truth to his wife. What had happened? The two comforted her and got up to leave the June family's residence. Out of the long alley, Li He stood on the street for a long time without saying a word. Strangely, Yen Sherwei sat on the horse next to him and didn't move. After a long time, Yen Sherwei sighed softly and said, "Master He, I'm afraid the decades of peace on Bar River are coming to an end." Li He smiled faintly and said, "Has Bar River ever been peaceful?" Yen Sherwei said, "With wind and waves it is called Jianghu. If it wasn't peaceful, it would depend on how big the waves were. In the past, the waves could overturn other people's small boats, but they couldn't overturn our big boats. To us, that was peaceful. Now, I'm afraid there's going to be a huge storm that can capsize the Flood Dragon Society." Li He stared deeply at Yen Sherwei and said, "Within a day, the leader became a dead man for no reason. The branch leader of the Tsauko suffered a stroke and became a living dead. Now only you, the branch leader of the Chaoquan branch leader, what do you plan to do?" Yen Sherwei smiled bitterly and said, "Master He, you're making fun of me by saying that. In the past, no matter how much we fought, it was always about who would take the helm. After all, we're on the same boat. Now that this storm is going to overturn the boat, I can't run away and I can't hide from you. I hope that Master He can help me out." Ever since Li He handed over the position of the branch leader of the Chaoquan branch, the two of them started fighting openly and secretly. But now they had to help each other out to deal with the current situation. Yen Sherwei knew that the most powerful person in the Flood Dragon Society was this semi-retired Master He, so he had to lower his stance and seek cooperation. Li He was silent for a while and said slowly, "Last night, an uninvited guest came to my house." Yen Sherwei's body shook and he cried out involuntarily, "What?" Li He revealed a faint smile and said, "It seems that Vice President Yen also has a guest visiting." Yen Sherwei slowly calmed down from the shock and decided to have a frank talk with Li He. He said, "That's right. Last night, Someone from my house also came to visit. Someone came. Yan Sherwei told Li Hei what that person had said and stared at Li Hei. Master Hei, what did that guest say? Li Hei said, that person said the same thing as your guest. Yan Sherwei stared at him without blinking and said, then what did Master Hei say? Li Hei said, looks like there's more than one of them. But even if there are a few or a dozen of them, and each of them is a good man who can fight against 100 people, they still can't control Ba. No one can make the tens of thousands of people on Ba bow their heads to him with just their fists. If you can't make a living for them, they won't listen to you, even if they have to fight you to the death. Yan Sherwei said, I thought so too. They can't make me bow my head with their fists. But it's different now. You've seen how stupid Junrian is when he's pretending to be crazy. He's so scared that he'd rather give up his position as the helm of the Tsauko and give up his generous annual income to hide at home and pretend to have a stroke. The person who wants to control Ba must have a powerful background. Junrian fears them like a tiger. Do you think we have a higher status than this Duke Xiaolian? Li Hei said, it's good that Vice Head Yin understands this. In that case, shouldn't the two of us seriously consider that uninvited guest suggestion? Yan Sherwei said, what does Master Hei plan to do? I'm young and inexperienced, so I'll just follow your lead. Li Hei saw that he was still trying to play tricks and couldn't help but laugh. If a ship is about to sink and everyone wants to live, the best way is to climb onto another ship, a bigger one. What do you think? Yan Sherwei's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you sure that's a big ship? Li Hei said indifferently. I didn't believe it at first, but after seeing Junrian's expression, you don't. The two of them stopped talking and looked at the long street together. As the sun set, the dark red light bathed the ancient city of Chang, and which was as orderly as a chessboard. Standing on the long street, they were like two insignificant chess pieces on this huge chessboard. Advancing or retreating was insignificant to the chess players, but for these two chess pieces, it was a matter of life and death. The setting sun mixed the shadows of the man and the horse into a very strange shape, dragging on for a very long time. Li Hei stood there silently, recalling what the guest had said to him last night. He didn't quite believe it at the time, but now he had to take it out again and carefully ponder over it. Master Hei, I'm telling you today because I'm not afraid that you'll leak it. But remember, if you leak a single word from your mouth, don't even think about hearing your grandson call you grandpa for the rest of your life. Speak. Our goal is to consolidate the current Water Gang and rebuild the situation of the Water Gang during the end of the Sui dynasty. Haha, that's just wishful thinking. It's simply impossible. Do you think you can subdue the Flood Dragon Gang with your martial arts? Not just us. There are the Life League, the 5 Elemental Guild, the 3 Rivers Gang, the Circle Sect, and the Peace Gang that are stronger than us. These first-class gangs are rich and powerful. They have money and people if you want to use force. Even if they don't have masters who can compete with you, they can spend a lot of money to invite eccentric Jianghu, people who can compete with you. What's more, if they invite the official forces behind them, unless you rebel, a patrol officer and a team of constables can make you piss your pants. Haha, you don't have to worry about whether we have the ability or not. You should be clear that if all the major waterway gangs on Bashang can be united, it will be beneficial to everyone except for the gang leaders, society leaders, and sect leaders who have inherited their positions of power and authority. After the unification, you can gather all the skilled sailors to transport the important, urgently needed, and heavy goods that are inconvenient to transport by land by ship, and other goods that are difficult to transport by water can be transported by land. This way, everyone's lives will be much better than they are now. There will be less competition and exclusion between gangs. Everyone will be united. Even if there are no ports, the officials along the way won't dare to extort or make things difficult for you. Otherwise, if the transport of grain is affected, the whole of Chang'an will be affected. This matter will be of great personal benefit to you. Once the water gangs are united, we will follow the original rules of the Shun sect and set up 8 elders and 36 stewards. You should know that after the gangs are united, a steward will be more powerful than a helmsman. Most importantly, at that time, you won't have to worry about your family business being taken away by others because of your grandson's young age. Right now, in the big water gangs, aside from the stable position of gang master, if the helmsmen don't have capable descendants to inherit their positions, they will inevitably have their power taken away by others after a bloody struggle. But once they are united, even if your grandson is young, he can firmly hold on to the rice bowl you left him. It won't be taken away by others, because when he is young, his affairs can be handled by other stewards, and it won't affect the affairs of the water gangs. On the other hand, if anyone has designs on your grandson, the 8 elders and 36 stewards will support you, because no one can guarantee that there won't be orphans and widows in their branch one day. Helping you today is helping them tomorrow. Thinking of this, Li Hei suddenly raised his head and shook the reins of his horse. He said to Yen Sherwei, "I, Li Hei, am old. I only have this precious grandson. I don't want anything else but to leave a family business for my grandson so that he can eat and wear warm clothes. I'll work for whoever gives me food. What do you say?" Yen Sherwei rolled his eyes and said through gritted teeth, "Then shall we go meet them tonight?" Li Hei nodded, whipped his horse, and galloped away. Yen Sherwei stared at his receding figure for a long time. It was only when Li Hei's figure was about to disappear at the end of the long street that Yen Sherwei ruthlessly lashed his whip and led his men away. Over the past day, the Shun gang had received too many surprises or scares. Last night, they were still on tenterhooks worrying about the revenge of the Flood Dragon Triad. But this morning, they received the news of the death of Wen Chongqing, the leader of the Flood Dragon Triad. When the Wen family held a funeral, Qiao Mu anxiously waited for the people of the Flood Dragon Triad to break in openly and kill his whole family. This kind of thing had happened before. 12 years ago, there was a leader of a small gang who didn't listen to the Flood Dragon Triad because of his outstanding martial arts skills and unruly character. At that time, when Chongqing, who had just taken over the position of the gang leader, used him as an example and led his men to break into his house. After one night, the whole family of this hero disappeared in the surging Wei River. Today, was this scene going to repeat itself in the Qiao family? However, in the evening, the turning point came. Chapter 953. In the evening, another piece of shocking news came. Jun Rian, the deputy leader of the Flood Dragon Triad, had suffered a stroke. Until now, the Flood Dragon Triad still hadn't taken any action against the Shun sect. Qiao Mu was a veteran in Jianghu. Maybe his ability was not as good, but his vision was not bad. All these were enough to show that the girl did have an extremely powerful force behind her. Qiao Mu thought it through, so he stood on Gu Zhuding's side. He had no choice. Other small sects didn't care about being annexed by others as long as they could make a living, but he couldn't. He carried the glory of his ancestors, but he couldn't restore the glory of his ancestors. This had become his biggest worry. He would rather die than let the inheritance of his ancestors be destroyed. Even if there was only one boat left in the Shun sect, at least the name was still there. This might be a very stupid idea, but in Qiao Mu's belief of respecting his ancestors, this kind of persistence was the belief he had been fighting for all his life. Therefore, he couldn't give up, even if the flag of the Shun sect was already broken. If he didn't give up, under the full suppression of the Flood Dragon Triad, he could only give his ancestors an explanation with his life. In the end, the Shun sect still couldn't escape the danger of being destroyed. But now Miss Gu stood up. She might not be able to protect him forever with her martial arts, but she was obviously not alone. If the master that this young lady spoke of really had such great power, and if her master could even command the Duga family, then wouldn't it be possible for the Shun Gate to be safe from danger? Wouldn't it be possible for the Duga family to regain its former glory? Wouldn't it be possible for the Shun Gate to be restored? Therefore, after hearing the news of Jun Rian's stroke, Qiao Mu returned to his room, holding the sewn and dusty flag of the Shun sect, and thought for a long time. When he went out of his room again, he summoned his 2 brothers and several stewards of the gang, and decisively issued an order. From now on, his niece, Gu Zhuting, would be the leader of the Shun sect. There were more than 20 people in the Shun sect who could fight. These people had seen Gu Zhuting's martial arts and were naturally convinced by her, so there was no resistance to this appointment. However, all of these people were currently injured. If something were to happen now, it was likely that Miss Gu would have to take action alone. There were more than 200 strong men in the gang, but with their mediocre martial arts, having them take action would only add to the medical expenses of their already strapped lives. Then, Qiao Mu asked Yiqing to go out with his wounds. According to Gu Zhuting's order, he went to visit the other small gangs that were also bullied by the big gangs, and asked their grandmasters to come to the Shun Gate to discuss some matters. At dusk, Li Hei and Yan Sherwei returned from Chang'an City. They first went to the Wen Mansion and lit a stick of incense for Wen Changxing's memorial tablet. They said a few words to young Master Wen, who was keeping vigil, and then quietly returned to their own homes. They did not mention when they would support young Master Wen to ascend to the throne, nor did they mention taking revenge on the Shun school. The leaders of the small gangs who received Qiao Mu's invitation did not go to the Shun sect immediately. Instead, they kept a close eye on the Flood Dragon cult's reaction. They were not as powerful or capable as the Flood Dragon cult, but it didn't mean that they were not as smart. The abnormal behavior of the Flood Dragon cult made them decisively walk out of their homes and rush to the Qiao family. Obviously, there was going to be a change in Ba, although the Shun sect had not revealed their trump card. Judging from the reaction of the Flood Dragon cult, they must have something to rely on. It was always good for them to go to the Shun sect and find out what was going on. Compared with the Flood Dragon cult, they were closer to the Shun sect, which had also been bullied. "Brother Qiao, how are you?" When the leaders of the small gangs arrived at the Qiao family, they pretended to ask about Qiao Mu's injury, but their eyes kept glancing at Gu Zhuting, although they had long known that it was this woman who made the Flood Dragon cult suffer a great loss. The leader of the Flood Dragon cult died suddenly. The helmsman of the Tsaoko suffered a stroke, the helmsman of the Chaoquan school, and another deputy leader of the Chaoquan school didn't dare to say anything because of her. But when they saw her with their own eyes, they still couldn't believe that she was such a delicate and timid woman. Her waist wasn't even as thick as my thigh. After Qiao Mu introduced Gu Zhuting one by one, he said to the leaders, "This is my niece. Her surname is Gu. From now on, she is the helmsman of the Chaoquan school of the Shun sect. I'm injured and need to recuperate for a while, so she is now in charge of all the affairs of the Shun sect. Today, I invited you here because I have something to discuss with you. Zhuting, tell your uncles about it." Gu Zhuting nodded and neatly cupped her hands to the crowd. Then she said in a clear voice, "Seniors, in terms of seniority and age, I, a junior, have no place to speak in the Shun sect. Since my uncle has put this burden on my shoulders, and my brothers trust me, I have no choice but to take this responsibility. I'm young and inexperienced. If I've said something wrong, please forgive me." Han Yuantang of the Iron Helm Gang said, "In Jianghu, those who are capable come first. Miss Gu, don't stand on ceremony. Our muscles and bones are rusty, but our old eyes are still sharp. We know what happened on Ba in the past 2 days. Hee, if we really compare, we are old loaches in a shallow ditch, while you are a dragon girl in a big river. If you have anything to say, just say it. Okay." Gu Zhuting said straightforwardly, "You are all like our Shun sect. You are all bullied by those big gangs and sects, and you all seek a way to survive through the fingers of others. Now that I'm the helmsman of the Chaoquan school of the Shun sect, I have to think about the Shun sect. I wonder if we all stick together, will others still treat us as pushovers? Seniors, each of you has 5 or 6 boats and 100 brothers. If we stick together, we will have 30 or 40 boats and 800 or 900 brothers. At that time, let alone others, at least gangs like the Flood Dragon cult will not dare to bully us casually. Han Yuanting frowned and interrupted Gu Zhuting. Miss Gu, you must have never been in the transportation business, haven't you? Some things are not as simple as you say. Gu Zhuting smiled and said, Please enlighten me, senior. Han Yuantang said, If it's just to stick together, do you think we will wait until now? Brother Qiao's Shun sect is an old name. It used to be the most famous signboard in the underworld. Brother Qiao doesn't want to ruin his ancestral business, but we don't have such concerns. We've worked hard for half of our lives and pieced together these broken boats just to make a living. If we could have a big tree to rely on, we'd be more than happy to have it. But we have too many people and too few boats. Those big sects don't care about us. It's even harder to make a living on our own. Our boats are neither big nor small, and our disciples' water skills are just passable. We can't take some jobs, and we don't dare to take some that we can, because those big gangs won't let us go if we block their way of making money. They don't need to use force, but they will make trouble for you along the way, and you won't be able to continue your business. From collecting taxes and grain to shipping, from Yangzhou to Chang, and all the profitable places had long been divided up by the big gangs and sections. We were weak, and we didn't have the Chao Ko to take care of, so we could only follow behind the big gangs and sects, picking up the scattered businesses that they were too lazy to do or that weren't profitable. Those big gangs have connections, means, and backers. That's why they want to do business as big as possible. We don't have any of these things. We only have a few broken boats and 100 brothers, and we can barely fill our stomachs. Once we stick together, how can we do business? Gu Zhuting's clear eyes swept across the crowd and asked, Seniors, do you all have the same concerns? The crowd nodded one after another, all talking at once, sighing endlessly. Gu Zhuting smiled and said, If I say that these are not problems for me, then would you all be willing to join me? The crowd listened and looked at each other. Han Yuantang asked doubtfully, Miss, do you really have this ability? It was no wonder that he didn't believe her. If the Shun Gate could solve these problems, why would they need to pull them in? They had fewer boats and more people, and their skills in sailing were poor, so they would be a burden to others. Just as Gu Zhuting was about to speak, Zhu Yiqing suddenly walked in and rushed to Gu Zhuting's side. He whispered a few words into her ear. Gu Zhuting smiled lightly, and a pair of attractive dimples appeared on her cheeks. Uncles, please follow Brother Zhua. I'll treat you to a good show. At night, Baishan Town was still bustling with activity. This place was originally a relatively isolated environment. Other than transporting water, the locals were mostly doing business. Therefore, the gradually desolate atmosphere of the long streets in Chang and city before the curfew could not be seen here. The people strolling on the streets were still taking leisurely steps, and the small businesses were still doing well. The taverns were bustling with noise, and the gambling dens were shouting and drinking. The gamblers were shouting until their ears were red, and the low-end brothels had red lanterns hanging high. The sounds of birds chirping could be heard. Baishan Town at night was even livelier than during the day. There were more than 40,000 watermen and sailors in Baishan Town, and this did not include the families of those who were already married. Adding on the original families of the town's farmers and some merchants who came to the town to do business as watermen, it formed a special group with a high population density. The main force of this group was the tens of thousands of watermen and sailors. Most of them were bachelors. Wine, women, avarice, and anger were their favorite places to spend their time, and thus caused the abnormal prosperity of Baishan Town. This abnormal prosperity appeared at the end of every year, because the watermen had all returned to the town, and it was especially lively. When they were about to reach Baishan Town, Yang Fan changed his appearance. A messy beard appeared under his chin, and his eyes were still handsome. Because of this beard, it gave him a bit more of a rough and heroic feeling of a Jianghu person. This was something Yang Fan had learned from Anu before he left the capital. It could not be said to be very brilliant, but it was just a simple disguise. It could not be hidden from acquaintances, but it was enough to deceive people in Baishang town. Yang Fan had just entered the town with his horse, and from the way the townspeople looked at them, he felt that something was wrong. This was not Luoyang City, nor was it Chang'an City. It was not the kind of big city where scholars and merchants from all over the world came to study. Here, even if there was only one person, as long as you were a stranger, it would be like a drop of water splashed into a pot of boiling oil, immediately attracting the attention of the people of Baishang town. Although Baishang town had a population of more than 100,000, and not all of the townspeople knew each other, but from a person's attire and temperament, they could easily distinguish whether you were a townspeople or not. Yang Fan's group of 5 was a bigger target. Moreover, such a big incident had just happened in the town today, which made it even more eye-catching. Yang Fan had not yet made contact with Gu Zhuting, so he did not know how the situation was going. It was not suitable for others to know his purpose now, so he decisively dispelled the idea of directly going to the Shun Gate. In a low voice, he said to Rinwei, "Let's first find an inn, and stay there before we talk." Chapter 954. A rotten ship still had 3 caddies of nails. The 3 caddies of nails from the Shun Gate were reflected in their Ju-Yi Hall. All these years, the Shun Gate was Wang Shao Heir's New Year. Everything that could be sold had been sold, and everything that could be pawned had been pawned. The only thing that was still decent was this Ju-Yi Hall. Although the paint on the pillars was peeling, they still firmly supported the spacious hall. There was nothing left of this Ju-Yi Hall that was built during the reign of Emperor Wen of Sui, except for the huge seating screen that was made up of 36 screens. The seating screen was extremely old, but from the intricate carvings and the complicated and vivid river patterns, one could still vaguely see the grandeur of this hall that could accommodate hundreds of heroes at the same time. Gu Zhuting entered the Ju-Yi Hall under the guidance of 2 disciples of the Shun Gate. The empty Ju-Yi Hall no longer had a main seat, only 2 rows of seats facing each other. In this huge hall, there were only 2 rows of seats, 3 seats facing each other. It was too cold and cheerless. The people sitting on the guest seats were Li Hei and Yen Sherwei. From their attire, it was obvious that they had disguised themselves before coming. They naturally had a way to hide from the eyes of the townspeople and sneak into the Shun Gate to pay a secret visit. Seeing Gu Zhuting enter, the 2 hurriedly stood up and cupped their fists. "Greetings, Miss Gu." While the 2 of them were speaking, they were sizing up Gu Zhuting. Seeing Gu Zhuting's appearance, the 2 of them couldn't conceal their astonishment. Perhaps in their opinion, this woman who could fight 100 enemies, even though she was a woman, should be 2 zhang tall. Her arms should be able to run like a horse, and her fists should be able to stand like a man. They didn't expect her to be such a delicate beauty. Although she had a strong figure, light steps, and a hint of heroic spirit, her appearance was obviously very different from the heroine who could defeat 100 people of the Flood Dragon Gang in their hearts. "Greetings, Master He. Master Yen. 2 seniors, please take a seat." Gu Zhuting invited the 2 to take a seat and sat opposite them. She said with a smile, "I thought the 2 seniors would only come tomorrow. I didn't expect you to come tonight. Please forgive me for not going out to welcome you." Yen Sherwei thought she was teasing him and could only smile awkwardly. Li Hei suddenly thought of something and said, "Tomorrow? Could it be that something is going to happen tonight?" Gu Zhuting smiled faintly and said, "I wonder if Master He and Master Yen would be able to lead the Flood Dragon Union if Wen Bin was still around. Or are you willing to bear the reputation of betraying your master? If you can't or aren't willing, then I'll do it on your behalf and save you the trouble." Li Hei and Yen Sherwei looked at each other in shock. Could it be that the young master will also pass away tonight? Thinking of this possibility, even a veteran like Li Hei felt his scalp tingle. Gu Zhuting's bright eyes swept over them as she spoke in an indifferent manner, Haha, these are all insignificant matters. Let's not talk about them. Since the two seniors are willing to come, I believe that you have considered our previous suggestion. May I know what the two seniors have decided? Li Hei calmed himself down and said slowly, Miss Gu, if we agree, the 2,000 brothers of the Flood Dragon Gang will be on your boat, and we will have to rely on you to feed us in the future. Don't you think you should tell us the truth? Otherwise, if anything goes wrong, we won't be able to explain it to our brothers. Since Master He and Master Yen are so straightforward, I should be honest with you. Gu Zhuting straightened her slender waist and stood up nimbly. She clapped her hands 3 times and said loudly, Invite Mr. Dugu to meet the guests. After noticing the vigilant gazes of the townspeople, Yang Fan immediately slowed down his pace. He wanted to find an inn to stay in first. There were lights everywhere in the market, and people were walking to and fro. Sheds, stalls, and shops crowded the streets. Countless signboards and banners were sticking out of the shops on both sides of the road. When a slightly taller person walked in the alley, those signboards and banners would gently brush past his head. A few people slowly walking in front of him suddenly attracted Yang Fan's attention. One of them was very tall and wore a white robe that looked like a loose nightgown. He also had a thick shawl draped over his shoulder and a white square scarf with a hexagonal pattern on his head. The scarf was fastened to his head by a metal ring as wide as a finger. At a glance, it was obvious that he was an Arab. The people walking on his left and right were obviously his bodyguards. These warriors were dressed in simple clothes. Outside of their undergarments, a long brown cloth was draped diagonally over their shoulders. This could be considered their outer clothing. Their heads were also wrapped with square scarves of the same color. In their hands was a thin sword without a scabbard, only wrapped in a rag. This bearded Arab with sunken eyes and a straight nose was looking around as he walked. He seemed to be very curious about the situation in Baishan town. It seemed that he had also just arrived at Ba. Suddenly, someone from the second floor of the small building splashed a basin of water down. The water splashed at his feet, dirtying his white robe. Several of the warriors were enraged and immediately raised their heads. Like loyal dogs that had seen someone harm their master, they bared their fangs and growled threateningly. The white-robed Arab also raised his head in anger. However, the anger in his eyes quickly turned into surprise. There was a naked woman in the window. Yang Fan was standing at the side, and he could see her naked appearance from there. The woman did not feel the slightest bit of shame towards her naked body. She only looked a little cold. After splashing the water, she put down the wooden basin and reached out to close the window. As she bent down, a pair of plump breasts dangled down, making them seem even larger. Yang Fan knew who this woman was. There were many prostitutes in this town, but the prostitutes that specialized in the business of these laborers and sailors were naturally not of high quality. This woman's appearance was very ordinary, and she was a little chubby. However, her skin was very white. The Arab merchant raised his head and said excitedly, Look at what I see. Ah, that white skin is like a silver coin on a porcelain plate, or like a white antelope in the wilderness. Her face is like a full moon, and her plump breasts are like 2 large pomegranates. He did not expect this Arab to speak in the language of the Central Plains. However, his tone was a little strange, and there was a hint of a foreigner's accent. The woman on the second floor poked her head out and fiercely scolded. Yiksha, ghost, get lost! What are you blabbering about? A golden-haired and blue-eyed brat popped out from behind the Arabian merchant's robe. He was not very tall, only about 12 or 13 years old. Hands on his hips, he hopped up the stairs and yelled, Hey! Madam, don't be as blind as a bat. Our master is the most famous poet in Basra. His poems drive countless noble ladies crazy. Every word, he says, is like pearls falling on a plate. Although the woman on the second floor was a cheap prostitute who only knew how to sell flesh, and she might not even know how to read, as someone who was born in the country of poetry, she clearly had the ability to appreciate poetry. With just one word, she fully expressed her evaluation of this lousy poem. Bah! The woman slammed the window shut. The Arab merchant looked at the woman's back before the window closed, and was still in the mood to write a poem. Ah! Her angry eyes are like a nightingale that has seen a bug. Her angrily trembling belly is like the white of a fish's belly at dawn. She gracefully turned around and left, like an antelope, swaying her plump buttocks with her swaying waist. The blonde imp made a heart shape with his hands, and with a pair of beautiful blue eyes, he praised in an intoxicated manner. Ah! What a beautiful poem! What a beautiful poem! Like the first ray of dawn through the morning mist, like the first drop of morning dew on a green leaf. Ah! The great poet from a faraway country probably liked to use body language to accompany his recitation. As he recited the poem, he danced with joy. A drunkard who walked out of a small tavern happened to be caught in the eye by him. The drunkard was enraged and raised his hand to slap the poet. He scolded, "Do you not have eyes?" The great poet retreated awkwardly and angrily said to the drunkard, "You dare to humiliate me? You dare to humiliate the Honorable Abdul Shaman bin Aziz bin Hakam. Only a donkey is used to being humiliated. An honorable sir, a free man. Even a camel will not swallow this insult." The drunkard was about to walk away when he was amused by the poet's words. He stared at the Arab with a pair of bloodshot eyes and said, You demon, what nonsense are you spouting? You, what do you want to do?" The poet adjusted his headband in annoyance and sternly said, "A wolf will howl at a man without the protection of a dog, but when facing a strong man like a lion, there is only respect. I, the Honorable Mr. Abdul Shaman bin Aziz bin Hakam, for the sake of defending my dignity, want a duel with you. Go to hell." As soon as the poet said this, his warriors immediately lowered their shoulders and arched their waists, assuming an attacking posture. At the same time, they bared their snow-white teeth and growled threateningly from their throats. Their hands also tightly gripped the cylindrical and slender hilts of their swords. "Yo-ho, you want to duel with me?" The drunkard was overjoyed. He looked left and right, cupped his hands over his mouth, and shouted, "There's a demon looking for trouble with our Three Rivers gang. Brothers, charge!" Whoosh! Countless people swarmed out from the taverns, shops, and streets. Even the peddlers who had set up stalls by the roadside jumped out, tightly blocking the two ends of the street. The warriors with their long cloths did not show the slightest fear. They continued to bare their white teeth and widen their fierce eyes. However, the great poet seemed to be shocked by the situation. His angry expression quickly calmed down, and he said in a reserved tone, "Those who forgive will be forgiven by Allah. I will not lower myself to the level of a barbarian like you. Let's go, boss." The poet called out to his golden-haired attendant and turned to leave, but the entire street was blocked by the people of the Three Rivers gang. There was no way out. The drunkard stood on the side with his arms crossed and a cold smile on his face. The Arab poet's sudden change from arrogance to deference was truly frightening. Yang Fan suppressed his laughter and stepped forward, saying, "Brothers of the same gang should help each other. However, there is no need to make such a big fuss over a small dispute. Bullying foreigners is not a good reputation." Chapter 9:55. The drunkard glared at Yang Fan and said, "Who do you think you are? This is the Three River Gang's business. When did it become?" Before he could finish, he was pulled away by a strong man in his 30s. It seemed that this man had a high status in the Three River Gang. As soon as he appeared, the people of the Three River Gang immediately stopped making noise. When the drunkard turned around and saw that it was him, he immediately shut his mouth. The man looked up and down at Yang Fan. When he saw that Yang Fan was standing alone in the middle of the heavy encirclement, his expression was calm and without fear. A strange light flashed in his eyes. Ever since the Flood Dragon Gang had been in trouble, all the gangs on Ba were in a state of panic. This man was not from Ba, and yet he was so calm in the middle of the encirclement. This made the steward feel a bit of fear. He looked at Yang Fan and said with a fake smile, "This brother is right. It's just a quarrel. It's not good to make a big fuss. Everyone disperse, disperse." As soon as the man spoke, the people of the Three River Gang immediately dispersed. The other gangs saw that the two sides were not fighting, so they also dispersed. As they walked, they looked back and whispered to each other. Obviously, they were all guessing at Yang Fan's identity. The steward of the Three River Gang looked deeply at Yang Fan and turned to leave. The poet heaved a sigh of relief. Placing his hand on his chest, he bowed gracefully to Yang Fan and said with a smile, "It's a pleasure to meet you, elegant and graceful Mr. Dongfang. I'm Abdullah Shaman bin Aziz bin Hakam. May I know your name, Mr. Dongfang?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "My surname is Mui. You are Mr. Ah. Mr. Ah something?" The great poet smiled knowingly and said, "My friends call me Abdullah. Mr. Mu can also call me that." Yang Fan nodded and said, "Mr. Abdullah, in a foreign land, you should be careful in everything you do. Don't easily provoke trouble. You should know that the local people always look out for the local people. Well, you do what you need to do. I will leave now." No, Mr. Mu, I like you very much. You are willing to help me, and you have lofty morals. You have helped me, so I should repay you. Please allow me to entertain this esteemed friend of yours with delicious delicacies to express Abdullah's gratitude. The blonde Kid Abbas jumped out and helped his master. Being generous and hospitable is my master's ancestral tradition. Yang Fan shook his head and smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. There is no need for a meal. I just arrived in Ba and was looking for an inn to stay. I have just arrived. I just arrived." Abdullah gladly replied, "What a coincidence! I have also just arrived at the town and have just settled down. The inn I am staying at is the best inn in this town. Mr. Mu, why don't you stay at the same inn as me? Come. I am honored to lead the way for you." Abdullah did not allow any explanation and pulled Yang Fan away. As he walked, he boasted, "Fortunately, Mr. Mu helped me out of the predicament. Otherwise, if I had really injured someone in a fit of anger, the authorities would have come looking for trouble with me. You should know that I am smart and brave. I have outstanding swordsmanship." The golden-haired imp, Abbas, jumped out again and boasted, "My master has killed 10,000 enemies, burned their tents, snatched their camels and women, and won a lot of gold. My master has 1,000 scars on his body, and they are all scars from battles. The blood that my master has shed is more than the water of the Wei River in front." Rinwei and the others followed behind with their horses and looked at each other in dismay. Yang Fan looked at Abdullah and said with some surprise, "So Mr. Abdullah is a brave warrior?" In fact, he wanted to ask if this great poet was a bandit or a bandit. From the stories that his servant had boasted about, this great poet seemed like a bandit from the western desert. Abdullah modestly waved his hand and said, No. I am a merchant, a wealthy merchant." The golden-haired kid, Abbas, immediately continued, "My master is a merchant who sells everything, an invincible warrior, a world-famous poet, and—" Abdullah smiled and said, All right. You talkative little fellow, be quiet. I want to chat with the respected Mr. Mu." Yang Fan did not know that the poetry of Dashi had a special type of praising poetry. Regardless of whether it was praising others or praising themselves, they would use the most exaggerated words and tone without blushing. Usually, there would be an eloquent slave who was favored by the poet to help them. This was a habit that the well-educated nobles of Dashi had developed since they were young. It was not that he wanted to blow his own trumpet in front of Yang Fan. However, because his tone was too exaggerated, it sounded like an old friend deliberately boasting in front of him. Yang Fan did not feel the slightest bit disgusted. Yang Fan asked as they walked, "What kind of business does Mr. Abdullah do?" Abbas immediately jumped out and interrupted. "My master is willing to sell anything." Abdullah glared at him and said to Yang Fan with a smile, I mainly deal in all kinds of spices, precious jewels, beautiful blankets, and slaves from various countries. The ones I sell to the east are mainly female slaves. This time, I traveled tens of thousands of li to Chang'an. However, a guide I was familiar with fell ill, so I had to change to someone who was not too familiar with the roads. In the end, he led us on a wrong path, and we went to Taiyuan. Only when we got there did we realize that we had gone the wrong way. We could only hurry back here and take a boat to get here. I have many camels and slaves, so it is more convenient to live here than in the city. Abdullah was a very talkative person. Yang Fan only asked one question, and he talked for a long time. Besides explaining that he was originally going to Chang and why he was here, he also explained his identity. He was a traveling merchant. The Abbasid Caliphate was very developed. The Abbasid Caliphate's merchants were divided into 3 types: peddlers, sitting merchants, and traveling merchants. The peddlers bought goods from the workshops and brought them to the regular markets to be traded. The sitting merchants were usually based in a certain city. They were wealthy enough to rival a country and were known as Taji. However, their business was not limited to their own city. When they did business with foreign countries, they would use traveling merchants. Traveling merchants were sent by sitting merchants to bring large amounts of goods or money to foreign countries to do business. Traveling merchants who could be sent by sitting merchants were usually very prestigious in their own countries, had their own estates and land, and were of noble character. Otherwise, if a traveling merchant took the goods of a sitting merchant and never returned, that sitting merchant would suffer a great loss. Yang Fan patiently listened to him finish, then interjected, "Sir Abdullah has traveled tens of thousands of li to come here. This is no small risk." Abdullah replied, "Without risk, how can there be profits? I am Taji of Basra's most trusted friend. I have been entrusted by him to come to the Far East. I am very happy to meet you, Sir Mu. My soul tells me that you are an extraordinary person. This is not my first business in the East, but I hope that this will be the largest with your help." His eyes sparkled as he said this, like 2 stars peeking out of the night sky, exuding an indescribable sense of mystery. Yang Fan's eyes met his, and he smiled inexplicably. Following Abdullah to the inn, Yang Fan found that the courtyard was full of camels, boxes, and groups of black and white slaves. The entire inn had been booked by Abdullah. Although the weather was already cold, many slaves could only sleep on the ground under the porch. Abbas was a favored slave, so he was qualified to sleep on the ground in his master's room. As soon as Abdullah entered the inn, he immediately ordered his warriors loudly, "Hey, hurry up and move out of your rooms. All of you, squeeze together and give your rooms to my honorable guests. You, and you lazy bums, quickly get up and make a few exquisite dishes. I want to entertain my friend with them. Remember to put more spices in the meat." Yang Fan took the opportunity to whisper into Runway's ear, "Go out and take a walk. Contact Miss Gu. Chang and City, Huaijin Workshop, Zhang Yu's mansion." Under the light, Zhang Yu sat upright and still. His eyes were bright as he listened carefully to the person sitting opposite him. If the young masters of the aristocratic families who were close to him saw Zhang Yu's eyes at this moment, they would never believe that this was the person they were familiar with. Zhang Yu had always been known as a bookworm among them, and he was often ridiculed for this. However, there was a kind of stupidity known as great intelligence. While they were chattering like a flock of hens, wearing their glorious and noble family backgrounds as colorful feathers, and thinking that they were proud peacocks, the seemingly simple-minded nerd who didn't understand the affairs of the world was secretly working hard to manage his forces. Perhaps the influence of his family and his identity played a big role in this, allowing him to only use 1% of the strength of an ordinary person, and yet he could do better than those people. It did not show his intelligence, but since he had better conditions and a higher starting point, why didn't he use it? There was no absolute fairness in the world. You could be born with intelligence that ordinary people did not have, But he could also be born with a noble status that you did not have and have thousands of times more connections and resources than you did. At least, as a noble young master born with a golden spoon in his mouth, it was very amazing that he could have such schemes and ideals. When young Master Jiang had kidnapped the pregnant Xiaoman, the aristocratic families had tried to put him under house arrest to ease the conflict between the two sides. At that time, it was Zheng Yu who had secretly sent young Master Jiang out of Chang, and because he owed young Master Jiang a favor. At that time, Chang and was the world of Xianzong. What kind of favor did he owe young Master Jiang? His many years of work had finally paid off. When the connections that the aristocratic families had worked so hard to build in Guangzhou were torn apart, and some officials that had been supported by the aristocratic families were implicated, they were either imprisoned, executed, transferred, or removed from office, he did not need to keep up the pretense. He began to reveal his sharpness and his strength. Those aristocratic young masters who used to laugh at him for his stupidity suddenly realized that they were the ones who were stupid to the extreme. Zhang Yu was slightly proud of this. The saying, "If you don't cry, you will amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. If you don't fly, you will soar into the sky with a single leap." This was probably his true portrayal. The person responsible for mediating the conflict between the Xianzong and hidden sects in Luoyang was Qinhe Chui Lin, the person in Chang, and to prevent the conflict between the Xianzong and hidden sects was him, Xinyang Zhengyu. Chapter 956. Inyang's Zheng clan and Longshi's Li clan were the biggest supporters of the hidden sect behind the scenes, and also the most powerful controllers. Zheng Yu had some secret cooperation with young Master Jiang, the head of the obvious sect. In return, he established his own network of influence and connections in Chang, and at this critical juncture, he was naturally entrusted with a heavy responsibility by the aristocratic families. Chui Lin's mediation in Luoyang was actually a failure. He lacked experience and didn't have enough connections in Luoyang to make use of. If it wasn't for the fact that the obvious and hidden sects realized that both sides would suffer losses if they continued to fight like this, and that it would arouse the strong opposition of the 7 aristocratic families, Chui Lin wouldn't have accomplished anything. Of course, the masters of the aristocratic families, who were experienced in the ways of the world, would not place all their hopes on the alliance between the two sections. Shen Mu took drastic measures and borrowed the strength of the two sections. He actually facilitated the emperor to move the capital. However, Yang Fan immediately became one of the first batch of advance personnel. This matter immediately aroused the sensitive nerves of the masters of the aristocratic families, who were under great pressure. They hoped that Yang Fan's advance was just a coincidence. It was because of the emperor's trust in him and not because he wanted to come to Chang and to stir up trouble. But they were afraid that they would be wrong. What if Yang Fan really came for the hidden sect? Their old bones really couldn't withstand such torment. This task was handed over to Zheng Yu. Zheng Yu hoped that he could do 10 times better than Chui Lin. Although the Zhang family's ranking was lower than the Chui family, the competition between the aristocratic families was ultimately a competition for talents. If he could resolve this matter perfectly, the Zhang family would be able to suppress the Chui family in terms of prestige. For this, he had to do his best. Zhang Yu stared at the person opposite him with bright eyes and said in a deep voice, "Has Yang Fan arrived in Chang'an today?" Yes. Under the slanting light, the man's face was half-lit. His hair was white, his eyebrows were thin, his eyes were thin, his temples were bald, and his lips were like that of a Buddha. He was none other than Chu Tianqing, the military advisor of the Chang and local government, also known as the Vulture. Tell me in detail. Yes, leading the entire 1,000 horseman battalion Yang Fan, along with Chen Dong and Sun Yuxuan of the Ministry of Justice, Hu Yuanli of the Censorate, Shi Yu, Wen Ao, and a group of government officials, arrived at Chang'an this afternoon. The Lord of Hanoi had sent out invitations 1 day in advance, inviting all the officials, dignitaries, relatives of the emperor, and the heads of the aristocratic families in Guanlong to a banquet to humiliate Yang Fan. when Yang Fan and the others arrived in Chang, and no one came to greet them. They entered the city on their own. The attendants of the Ministry of Justice and the censorate respectively stayed in the assistant yamen, while the 1,000-horseman battalion camped outside the Black Tortoise Gate in the northern part of the city. After that, Yang Fan invited the officials of the Ministry of Justice and the censorate to have a drink at the Shihua House in Pingkong Square. Oh! Zhang Yu smiled thoughtfully and said, "This Yang Fan does not have any aristocratic family background. Born in a common family, he is successful at a young age. His position is high and powerful, but he is not arrogant. Even when the king of Hanoi treats him like this, he cannot be angered. His self-restraint is very good. A person who was not easily angered was usually very scheming. Such a person was not easy to deal with." "Go on." "Yes. Unfortunately, the Lord of Hanoi's banquet was also in Pingkong Square, and it was just a wall away from Yang Fan and the others. They could hear the music, and their facial features could be seen clearly. Yang Fan and the others were noisy, talking and laughing, which made the Lord of Hanoi very unhappy. As a result, the banquet ended hastily. Zhang Yu was stunned. After a long while he laughed and shook his head. Forget it. I praised him just now, but I overestimated him. I really thought he was indifferent to praise and humiliation, and that he was very scheming. But it turns out, what coincidence? How could there be such a coincidence? This Yang Fan obviously found out where the Lord of Hanoi was, and deliberately went to show off in front of him." Chu Tianqing smiled bitterly and said, "Young master is right, but this is the only reason we should be careful. The mission that old mistress gave to young master is to pay close attention and not let the obvious and hidden sects cause any more trouble. With Yang Fan's extreme character, he doesn't care about the severity of the situation, and he will definitely take revenge. It will be fine if the hidden sect doesn't provoke him. But if the hidden sect does something inappropriate, it is imaginable how Yang Fan will react." Zheng Yu frowned and asked, "Is Shenmu back?" Chu Tianqing replied, "Not yet." This time, the Yan province, the Dan province, and the Feng province had incidents one after another. All the major clans were implicated, and some of the officials related to the hidden sect were imprisoned. Shenmu is still in Luoyang, running around for them, hoping to rescue them. It isn't easy to support an official, as long as those people aren't beheaded. Even if they are exiled to Lingnan, they will have a chance to make a comeback in the future. Once they make a comeback, they will be useful people. How can Shenmu bear to give them up? Zhang Yu felt relieved and nodded. That's good. The hidden sect only follows Shenmu's lead. Before Shenmu returns, the hidden sect won't act rashly. At least, they won't make any big moves. Chu Tianqing reminded, "Isn't young master worried that Yang Fan will stir up trouble?" Zhang Yu shook his head and said, "It isn't possible. From Yang Fan's usual character, if someone dares to bully him, he will oppose them with equal harshness. However, he rarely initiates trouble. If it wasn't for the fact that Shenmu intentionally hid his tracks and was obviously targeting Xianzong, Yang Fan wouldn't have retaliated. If he had such intentions, he would have made his move while Shenmu was still in Xinluo. Right now, the Lord of Hanoi, Wu Yizong, has rushed to Chang'an. It is obvious that he intends to fight with Yang Fan for power in the officialdom. He wants to use the 1 year before the emperor to subdue the various factions in Chang, and for the Wu clan to use. In such a situation, unless the hidden sect stirred up trouble first, Yang Fan wouldn't easily start a war on both sides. Chu Tianqing spoke with admiration. "Young master is right." Zhang Yu smiled reservedly, nodded, and said, "Continue." Chu Tianqing said, "After the Lord of Hanoi and the others left, Yang Fan and the others continued to drink. After they were drunk, the officials of the Ministry of Justice and the imperial censors stayed at the Silk Flower Pavilion. The imperial censor took a fancy to a lady, and Yang Fan redeemed that lady and gave her to Siyu as a concubine. After that, Yang Fan returned to the barracks. Zhang Yu was slightly surprised and asked, "He didn't stay at the brothel?" "No." Zhang Yu rubbed his chin and muttered, "He doesn't drink and isn't lustful. It is said that a gentleman is self-disciplined. Gifting beauties is a habit of the wealthy. However, he is generous and hospitable, which is clearly a habit of the pugilistic world. He doesn't know how to endure in the officialdom and can't control himself at the slightest provocation. He will immediately retaliate, which is no different from a pugilistic world person who will draw his sword at the slightest disagreement. This should be his true nature. This person is a pugilistic world person in his bones. This kind of person is amenable to coaxing but not coercion, and is more interested in fame than profit. He won't be very ambitious. In reality, he is very easy to deal with. As long as Shenmu doesn't make trouble, he won't cause any more trouble." After he returned to the barracks, did he do anything else? No. Chu Tianqing's thick Buddhist lips curved slightly, like Buddha looking at the monkey sun jumping around in his palm. He said with slight disdain, "Before the well is filled, the general does not speak of thirst. Before the food is cooked, the general does not speak of hunger." This General Yang hasn't led troops for many days. He probably still remembers the rules of the military books and is working hard to buy people's hearts. Zhang Yu laughed lightly. In his eyes, Yang Fan was just a bumpkin who had gotten lucky. He had inexplicably climbed to a high position, but he didn't have any of the shrewdness and foundation of an upper-class person. He worked hard to become a qualified general, worked hard to become an upper-class person that matched the status of the leader of the Xian clan, but all of his efforts were for the sake of being a servant and a wife. Zhang Yu waved his hand and said disdainfully, "There is no need to pay too much attention to this person. The important thing is still Shenmu. I will send people to keep a close eye on Shenmu. As long as nothing goes wrong, the Xian clan and the hidden clan will not cause any more trouble." The old grandfather also has the same intentions. He feels that with Shenmu's usual shrewdness, he has made many stupid moves recently. It is somewhat strange. Zhang Yu's brow slowly furrowed, and he thoughtfully said, "I wonder what he is planning." As an extremely wealthy Arabian merchant, Abdullah was very particular about his food. He did not eat the food of the inn, but had his slaves cook a table full of Arabian delicacies for him and the honored guests. Their food was very ethnic, but the Arabians of this time did not care about luxury, nor did they like excessive formalities. Their food was simple and crude. There were 2 plates of fruit, raw vegetable leaves, and then there was meat soup and steamed buns, followed by pilaf and boiled mutton. He did not drink alcohol, and his drink was camel milk. It had to be said that the steaming and fragrant meat soup and flatbread were truly delicious. The large piece of boiled mutton was also very fragrant and tender. At the very least, it suited the appetites of Yang Fan and his guards. After the main course was finished, it was time for dessert. Yang Fan did not like desserts, but Abdullah did. With a beaming smile, he said, "In the name of Allah," and began to enjoy his delicacies. Abdullah ate the dessert with relish, while calling in batches of slaves, preparing to choose a gift for Yang Fan as a token of appreciation. Despite Yang Fan's repeated refusal, Abdullah very seriously told him that generosity was a virtue of the Arabians. In order not to damage this great poet's virtue, Yang Fan could only sit there and watch as the female slaves entered and left. "Is there anyone you like? Look, these are Indian slaves. They have gentle temperaments and are the best at taking care of children. You don't like them? That's right. The greatest weakness of Indian slaves is that they age very quickly. Then what about the Sindhi slaves? Look at their slender waists, their beautiful long hair. All right, let's change to another batch. These are female slaves born in Medina. They are the best at acting coquettishly to their masters. They are happy and humorous, and all of them have golden voices, whether it is at a ball or in bed. Their voices are especially enchanting. This is a female slave from Mecca. Look at her petite figure, those alluring eyes that seemed to open and close. Abdullah was in the zone. It was as if he was not giving away but selling. Spittle flew everywhere, as he spared no effort in promoting to Yang Fan. Why don't you consider this Berber female slave? Her skin is as smooth as silk, and her temperament is incomparably docile. She has a good background, a charming appearance, and a gentle temperament. For the sake of courtesy, Yang Fan resisted a yawn, and his eyes filled with tears. Chapter 9:57. Abdullah was not discouraged and continued to recommend to Yang Fan. Then what about this Roman beauty? Look at her rosy white skin, her soft flaxen hair, her big sapphire-like eyes, and her millstone-like buttocks. She's very fertile. You've never ridden a Roman woman before, right? You should ride her fiercely. She is so tasty. When the last batch of female slaves also left, Abdullah finally closed his mouth. As soon as the incessant chatter stopped, the room immediately became quiet. Abdullah propped up his chubby chin and said dejectedly, "My dear Moo, what do you like? You should at least accept one. This is the gratitude of your most sincere friend, Abdullah." As Abdullah spoke, he suddenly saw Yang Fan looking at the door, and the corner of his mouth suddenly revealed a trace of a smile. Abdullah immediately turned his head to look at the door, but the door was empty except for Yang Fan's 2 guards standing outside like javelins. There was nothing else. Yang Fan retracted his gaze and said to Abdullah with a smile, "I just saw a lot of blankets in your goods. Maybe you can give me one as a gift." Abdullah was overjoyed. "Okay, I will give you 50. Hey, that is the best wool carpet. 2 of them can be exchanged for a female slave." Yang Fan shook his head and said, No, 1 is enough. The friendship between friends is not determined by the amount of money. Do you want me to change my career to selling blankets?" Abdullah laughed heartily and immediately called for someone to fetch him the most luxurious blanket. When Abdullah handed the soft, smooth, feather-light blanket to Yang Fan's hands, he winked at him and said, "My dear Moo, there are so many beautiful female slaves, but you really don't like any of them, or your wife is too powerful." Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh. He patted his shoulder and said, "You are really smart, Abdullah, so I won't bother you. A blanket is better. The weather is cold, so it will be very warm to sleep on it." Abdullah shook his head. The bodies of beautiful female slaves are smoother and softer. 2 beautiful female slaves will make you sleep warmer than a blanket. There is a proverb in my hometown. Female slaves can be bought and sold freely, but free women are the shackles around men's necks. You shouldn't get married so early. Look at me, I am a happy bachelor." Yang Fan replied, That's right. It's a pity that I didn't meet a good friend like you before I got married and heard your priceless advice. Quickly go back and rest. It's already very late. Let's chat again tomorrow." Yang Fan smiled and pushed Abdullah out of the door. Abdullah mumbled as he walked away. Yang Fan turned and went back to the room, but he didn't close the door. A moment later, a slender figure suddenly flashed into the room and the door was closed by her. The woman was wearing a green short dress and had a graceful figure. She stood under the light and glanced at Yang Fan with a pair of bright and charming eyes. She said with a smile that was not a smile, "Ah, Lang should have accepted his kindness just now." Yang Fan smiled and said, "Yes, I originally wanted to accept it. It would be great to leave 2 beautiful female slaves to warm my bed, but I suddenly saw you. How can those women be as beautiful as shouting?" The woman's face immediately turned red. She bit her lips and lowered her head shyly, but she didn't say anything to object. Her charming shyness made Yang Fan's heart palpitate. When a mature and beautiful woman smiled shyly, that kind of charm was really irresistible. Yang Fan coughed and his throat tightened. "How's the matter of the Shun gang going?" Gu Zhuting immediately put on a joyful smile and said happily, "Li Hei and Yen Sherwei have agreed to join the Shun gang. I promised them that if the Shun gang can unify the Chow gang before the beginning of February next year, they will be one of the 36 stewards. If they can't do it, they can lead the people of the Flood Dragon Union to establish their own gang. Good. The situation has been opened up so quickly. With the Flood Dragon Union in our hands, we will have the ability to attack the first-class gangs. Yang Fan asked Gu Zhuting to sit down, picked up the half jar of camel milk, and poured a cup for her. Gu Zhuting thought that Yang Fan was thirsty at first, but when she saw that he was pouring it for her, she was rather flattered and stood up. She took the cup with both hands and said, "Not only the Flood Dragon Union, but also 7 small gangs have agreed to join. They have fewer ships and fewer people, but together they are not a small force. With their participation, the Shun Gang is now barely close to the first-class gangs." "Oh, is it really that smooth?" "You have to be careful. Don't let them test our strength by pretending to advance." "Of course not." Seeing that Yang Fan was a little suspicious, Gu Zhuting became anxious. She had just taken a sip of camel milk when she put the bowl back on the table. She hurriedly stood up and said to Yang Fan, "We've already demonstrated our strength. Jun Ruian's refusal to come out has also shown our influence in the government. In a situation where their lives are threatened and they can't resist, do they have any other choice? As for those small gangs, the fact that the Flood Dragon Union is willing to join the Shun sect is enough to give them enough confidence. I don't even need to reveal the details to them. All I need to do is let them stand behind the screen and hear Li He and Yan Sherwei agree to join the Shun sect with their own ears." Good, good, good. Look at how anxious you are." Yang Fan found it funny that Gu Zhuting was so anxious that her face was red. Under the light, her skin was pink and translucent. In a hurry, there was a drop of camel milk on her lips. The milky camel milk and the bright red lips. An evil scene suddenly appeared in Yang Fan's mind. His lower abdomen was a little hot. When he stretched out his trembling fingers and pressed Gu Zhuting's soft lips, he saw her cute eyes that were like that of a frightened deer. He didn't even have time to wipe away the drop of camel milk before he kissed her lips. Gu Zhuting only had time to let out a soft cry. As a result, not only did she lose her first kiss, but she also lost control of her little tongue, which was hooked by the tip of Yang Fan's tongue. It was only a kiss, but Gu Zhuting turned into noodles and her whole body softened. Fortunately, Yang Fan held her small waist in time. Gu Zhuting couldn't bear to be flirted with. Her whole body was intoxicated. When had she ever been cared for so gently? For a moment, her body and mind were intoxicated. Her body was burning hot, and she became softer and softer. Yang Fan couldn't make her stand just by holding her waist, so he took the opportunity to sit on the chair. Gu Zhuting, who was panting, was paralyzed on his lap. Yang Fan softly said, "It's not that I don't trust you. I'm just afraid that you will be too impatient. We have nearly 3 months, so we can take our time to plan. This decisive battle can't be early or late. It has to be at the end of January or the beginning of February next year. Only then will we have the right time, the right place, and the right people." Gu Zhuting snorted. Her cheeks were so hot that she didn't dare to raise her head. In fact, she also knew that her reaction just now was a bit excessive. As an assassin, her temperament had always been very calm. But she didn't know why, when Yang Fan revealed a trace of distrust in his tone, she became flustered. She embarrassedly lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Those small gangs don't know our real background. Li He and Yan Sherwei also don't know. They only know that we have the support of the Dugu family. They even think that we are people of the Dugu family. But with the name of the Dugu family, it is enough to subdue them." Yang Fan smiled and said, "In fact, in a place like Chang, and the name of the Dugu family is more useful than mine. They don't know what the succession hall is. It's enough to let them know that the Dugu family is supporting them." Ah! Yang Fan's hand wandered around. It wasn't known where he had touched, but Gu Zhuting's body fiercely trembled. Her face turned red, and her heartbeat quickened. Her breathing became ragged. Her pair of moist eyes looked at Yang Fan with a pleading expression as she softly said, "Master." Yang Fan's heart softened. So he moved his hand away from her breast. Gu Zhuting felt as if she had been granted amnesty. Her taut body relaxed a little. But the three Qiao brothers know that this third master successor can order around the Dugo family. But they don't know who he is and what his identity is. Should I tell them? Yang Fan gently patted her plump buttocks. He thought for a moment. Then he shook his head and said no. We don't need to tell them, at least for now. They value the word obedience more than their own lives. This is the greatest guarantee of their loyalty. We must let them know the details. But we must wait until they can no longer get off the boat. Yes. Yang Fan rested his chin on Gu Zhuting's shoulder. Her body was shivering. This kind of soft and timid appearance could easily arouse a man's beastly desire. Yang Fan resisted his impulse and continued, "You'll first integrate the word obedience. Then you'll gradually annex the other factions. I'll set up a decoy in the city, and I'll come to see you from time to time." Gu Zhuting enjoyed Yang Fan's caress very much. Her body felt limp, and her bones felt soft. She had never experienced such a feeling before, so she felt intoxicated. In fact, it seemed as if she was drunk. So she couldn't even reply. Yang Fan looked at her appearance, and he couldn't help but burn with lust. He knew that they couldn't talk about official matters, so it would be better to talk about private matters. Yang Fan subconsciously wanted to hug her leg. Gu Zhuting exclaimed, "Ah!" and wrapped her hands around Yang Fan's neck. Her hot face pressed against his cheek. She said in a trembling voice, "Master, you can't." Outside, there's someone. Gu Zhuting was shy. Yang Fan didn't have the habit of letting others eavesdrop. The room was very simple. There was no difference between the outer hall and the inner room. Yang Fan hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'll send them away." Gu Zhuting was very embarrassed. "Don't. That's too obvious." Yang Fan's face turned bitter. "Then what should we do?" Gu Zhuting said in a soft voice, next time, Your servant is already master's woman. Can I still run away?" Towards the end, her voice was as thin as a gossamer. Yang Fan said, "Then this time," Gu Zhuting gathered her courage and escaped from Yang Fan's body. She did not dare to raise her head to look at him. Her legs were still trembling. In a low voice she said, "Your servant is leaving first." The door opened. She left like a gust of wind. Yang Fan dejectedly looked at a certain ergo who was full of fighting spirit. He sighed and said, "All right, let's rest." Gu Zhuting stepped on a cloud, 1 foot high and 1 foot low. Like an arrow, she flew up to the top of the wall. Her limp legs couldn't support her anymore. "Ayo!" She cried out and fell down. A waiter of the inn heard the commotion. He picked up his stick and roared, "Blind little thief! You dare to break into an inn run by the Taiping clan!" Gu Zhuting covered her face and walked away in shame. Chapter 958. The next morning, Li He and Yen Shiwei arrived at Leader Wen's house. As Leader Wen's right-hand men, they didn't have to keep vigil for him at night, but it wouldn't be appropriate if they didn't do so during the day. Today, many gangs who had just received the news or had been observing yesterday came to offer their condolences. Li He and Yen Shiwei accompanied young master when to greet them one by one. Wenbin also sensed that something was wrong with Li He and Yen Shiwei's strange actions after Wen Changxing's death. He did not insist on immediately retaliating against them, but in his silence he maintained an obvious distance and vigilance towards Li He and Yen Shiwei, these two elders. The three of them made arrangements for Wen Changxing's funeral while meeting with the stewards of the gang. A semi-public competition was quietly going on in front of the morning hall. In fact, Wenbin didn't know what Li He and Yen Shiwei wanted to do. He couldn't guess it, but he had to be on guard. Therefore, after discovering that Li He and Yen Shiwei were working together, Wenbin immediately strengthened his contact with the forces loyal to the Wen family. However, the stewards loyal to the Wen family didn't care too much about these undercurrents. They were worried that the Flood Dragon Gang would lose the Tsauko. There were very few people in the gang. There was only one person, but he had the power to compete with the Chaoquan and become the gang leader's right-hand man. This was because he controlled a special resource, the power of the government. The power of the government was indispensable to the gang. Without the support of the government, a gang like the Flood Dragon Gang, which had hundreds of boats and thousands of members, would have to spend more than double to transport grain from Yangzhou to Chang, and it would be difficult to maintain. It was almost winter, and this year's transportation had basically ended. There would be a 3-month rest period. During this period, there wouldn't be any problems. However, when they went to Yangzhou again in the spring of next year, if they still couldn't get in touch with the powerful figures of the government, the Flood Dragon Gang would be finished. Perhaps the important figures in the gang knew who Jun Ruyan had connections within the government, but this didn't mean that they had the right or ability to replace Jun Ruyan and directly establish contact with this person. The biggest characteristic of unspoken rules was the word unspoken. Those officials who were willing to open the door to them for personal benefits did not have to worry about not having a source of gray income. The first thing they needed was safety, absolute safety. Once something happened, they could not be implicated. Therefore, there had to be someone they trusted to act as a go-between before they were willing to establish a relationship with them. People like Jun Ruyan were either schoolmates of those officials, disciples of the same master, or friends from the same hometown. In short, they were inextricably linked to each other. It was hard to imagine that these Jianghu people did not go through these special brokers, but directly brought a chest of gold and silver to visit, and those officials would be blinded by money and agree to be their protectors. However, what Wenbin was most worried about was that the position of the union leader would fall to someone else. Standing in different positions, one would consider different benefits. This was understandable. Wenbin thought of his father-in-law, the leader of the Heavenly Eagle Gang, Wei Yongtang, when he noticed that the stewards were not in a good mood. Wei Yongtang was a righteous man, not to mention that the person asking for help was his future son-in-law. Therefore, after receiving Wenbin's request for help, Wei Yongtang immediately came to the Wen family. Together with his daughter, Wei Yongtang respectfully offered a stick of incense to his old friend. Then he said to Li He and Yan Sherwei, "Master He, Brother Yan, many things have happened on Murky in the past 2 days. Everyone in the Flood Dragon League is panicking. Originally, this was a matter of the Flood Dragon Society, and I shouldn't interfere. However, I'm good brothers with President Wen, and now that our 2 families are going to be married, I should help you out. I hope the 2 of you won't mind my presumptuousness." Yan Sherwei said, "You're too polite, Wei Yongtang." "What do you mean?" Wei Yongtang said seriously, "I think that we should help nephew Wen ascend to the position of union leader as soon as possible to reassure everyone." Li Hei's face darkened. He rubbed his eyes and said, "Vice President Jun is bedridden and can't attend the meeting. As the helm of the Flood Dragon Union's Tsauko, if he can't attend the inauguration ceremony, everyone in the gang will feel uneasy. Let's focus on the funeral for the president. We need to rest on the Chao River for 2 to 3 months, so there's no hurry to take over the position." Wei Yongtang narrowed his eyes and said with authority, "Master He, how many people can recover from a stroke? Even if Vice President Jun gradually recovers, he'll probably be unable to walk or speak clearly. The helm of the Tsauko will change hands sooner or later. Master He still wants to wait for Vice President Jun to recover. Aren't you afraid of others gossiping?" Yan Sherwei suddenly interrupted. Master He's words make sense. Even if Vice President Jun can't recover, we should find another Tsauko. Without the Tsauko, young master will definitely be inferior when he ascends to the position. It'll be hard for him to win the loyalty of the gang's brothers, and he'll be laughed at by the other gangs. Wei Yongtang's eyes narrowed. He knew that Li He and Yan Sherwei didn't get along. Now that the two of them were in the same boat, he couldn't help but shudder. Wei Yongtang pondered for a moment and asked, then, Master He and Brother Yan, do you have a candidate for the helm of the Tsako? Li He replied, both Vice President Yan and I are people of the pugilistic world. We don't have any connections in the government, so where can we find a Tsako? Wei Yongtang said, since that's the case, our Heavenly Eagle Gang's Tsako can help. As for the benefits, how about it? Yan Sherwei sneered. If the helm of the Tsako becomes your Heavenly Eagle Gang's man and the president becomes your son-in-law, will the Flood Dragon Gang still exist? What a good plan, Boss Wei. Are you marrying off your daughter or looking for a son-in-law? Even the entire Flood Dragon Gang belongs to your Heavenly Eagle Gang? Wei Yongtang's expression changed, and he said, Yan Sherwei, what do you mean by that? I helped the Flood Dragon Union out of goodwill because of my friendship with Union Master Wen and the fact that your young Union Master is about to become my son-in-law. When have I ever had any selfish motives? When been interrupted, seniors, there's no need to argue. I'm willing to accept the help of my father-in-law. Li He glanced at him and said, you're not the president yet, and you're already treating the Flood Dragon Gang as the family? This sentence was not loud, but the meaning behind it was as heavy as a mountain. Wen Bin's face turned red when he heard it, and for a moment he could not say another word. There was only one thought ringing in his ears. They really have ulterior motives. They really have ulterior motives. Wei Xiaoxiao was both shocked and angry. Li He, what are you talking about? Although Wen Bin wasn't the guild leader now, could the guild leader be replaced by someone else? You're committing treason, deceiving your master and destroying your ancestors. Li He glanced at her and said, treason and treason? Treason and treason? I don't have any other abilities, but my seniority is high enough. Even your father has to call me Grandpa He. How dare you call me Li He? You don't know your place and your seniority. You haven't even married into the Flood Dragon Gang. Even if you become the president's wife, what right do you have to criticize the gang's affairs? Get lost. He didn't give her any face at all. Wei Xiaoxiao's face turned red from his scolding. Wei Yongtang's face darkened and he sneered. Ever since when Changxing passed away, I've felt that something was wrong. Have you finally revealed your true intentions? Good. Li He, use whatever tricks you have. I'll take them all. Yan Sherwei rolled his eyes and said sarcastically, since when do we need you to take over the Flood Dragon Gang's matters? Wei Yongtang heavily patted Wen Bin's shoulder. Wen Bin's frail and small body was almost slapped to the ground. Wei Yongtang sternly said, just because he is my son-in-law. As a father-in-law, standing up for my son-in-law, is it in line with the rules of the underworld? Both parties argued in front of the coffin. At first, their voices were soft, so no one noticed it. Later on, when they saw their expressions change, they knew that something had happened. The surroundings were already silent. They could only see that both parties seemed to be arguing, but they couldn't hear what they were saying. At this moment, Wei Yongtang's powerful words were heard clearly by everyone. They finally knew that something big had happened. The members of various gangs who came to pay their condolences immediately swarmed forward, while the stewards of the Flood Dragon Gang, who had been signaled by Li He, Yan Sherwei, or Wen Bin in advance, stood there with a gloomy face. Get out of the way, get out of the way. This is Wanyan County's business. Unrelated people, please leave. Following a shout, the two sides in front of the morning hall, who were at daggers drawn, looked over in surprise. They saw a group of bailiffs dressed in black, carrying chains and sabers on their waists, boldly barging in. For a moment, all the heroes in front of the morning hall were dumbfounded. But Excellency had always been the one to solve any problems on Ba. After years of special living conditions, Ba Excellency had developed this habit. Since when did he need the government to intervene? Whoever asked the government to intervene would be the public enemy of Ba. The weak did not dare to break this rule, and those who dared to break this rule did not need to break it themselves. But this rule was still broken today. When the bailiffs arrived in front of the morning hall, they parted to the left and right, and a person flashed out from the middle. Although the magistrate of Wanyan County had not appeared on Ba for almost 10,000 years, they were no strangers to this person, because they would always pay their respects to him on New Year's Eve. This person was the county magistrate of Wanyan County. His surname was Lang, and his name was Win. In the past, when they saw him on New Year's Eve, when he came with lavish gifts, County Magistrate Lang would always smile amiably. But today, County Magistrate Lang's face was frighteningly gloomy, causing those who wanted to come forward to pay their respects to shrink back. County Magistrate Lang did not look sideways. He walked to the front of the morning hall and stood still. With drooping eyelids, he asked, "Who is Wen Bin?" This was not the first time Wen Bin had visited on behalf of his father to send gifts to Uncle Lang. Now that he saw Uncle Lang like this, he was at a loss. He hurried forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Uncle Lang, shut up! Who's your uncle?" County Lieutenant Lang was full of righteousness as he said, "Wen Bin, your matter has been exposed. Men, take him down." Chapter 9:59. County Magistrate Lang waved his hand, and a few bailiffs, like wolves and tigers, pounced forward. The iron chains in their hands were wrapped around Wen Bin's head. Wen Bin turned pale with fright and exclaimed, "Lang Xiaofu, what crime did I commit?" Madam Wen Chongqing's concubines, and some of the Wen family members panicked. County Magistrate Lang rolled his eyes and sternly shouted, "Silence! I am only here to arrest the person. What crime did you commit? The county magistrate will know. Take him away." Wei Yongtang hesitated for a while before cupping his hands and said, "Lang Xiaofu." Lang Wen acted as if he did not know him at all and did not allow him to continue speaking. He immediately interrupted him and said sternly, "What? You want to stop me from handling this case?" Wei Yongtang hurriedly said, "I dare not. I am only—" "Then step aside or else arrest him as well." County Magistrate Lang's voice was stern. His skinny and dark cheeks were lined with lines that looked as if they were cast from iron. He really looked like an iron-faced judge. At this time, a short and fat man dressed in casual clothes squeezed in from behind. He stroked his mustache and asked, "Lang Xiaofu, have you arrested the person?" County Magistrate Lang's stern expression suddenly changed, and he hurriedly went forward, smiling like a spring flower in March. With a face full of radiance, he said, "Imperial Judiciary Official, you see, this lowly official has already said that such a small matter does not require your presence. Aren't we going to arrest them now? Shall we go back now?" Wenao had just caught up with weak steps. He had played canary cat for a whole night yesterday and had not exercised for a long time. His limbs were weak and his thighs were aching. After much difficulty, he finally caught up. Once he heard this, he panted and said, Let's go back now." These officials came quickly and left quickly. In a short while, they had left the Wen family. However, their act of breaking into the Wen family to capture people was like throwing a large stone into a pool of stagnant water that had been silent for many years. Many years of mud and residue floated up. Wei Yongtang's face turned ashen as he stared at Li He and scolded, "Master He, no matter how we fight amongst ourselves, we have to depend on the water for our livelihood. This is Ba Shang's own matter, but you actually allowed the government officials to interfere. Aren't you afraid of breaking Ba Shang's rules and becoming a public enemy? As long as the gangs on Ba were slightly more powerful, there would always be one or a few officials behind them. They could provide you with the convenience of sailing, but they would not easily get too involved and would not act as your hired thugs. However, this did not mean that they would not act when others deliberately challenged their authority. Blocking one's path to wealth was akin to killing one's parents. Officials were like wild beasts in the forest, each with their own sphere of influence. If someone crossed the line, it would immediately trigger a strong backlash. Hence, the official factions of power would only provide the convenience for you to pass through the checkpoint. As for the fights between sects or within sects, they would not interfere. This became a rule that everyone agreed upon. If any of the official factions directly interfered in the fights between sects, it would be seen as a direct provocation to the protector behind the other factions. If the protector also jumped out to accept the challenge, the heroes of Bashang would no longer have a choice whether to advance or retreat. At that time, they would naturally be the pawns and cannon fodder, not to mention how much money they would have to fork out to bribe the protector behind the scenes to personally pay for the transportation fees. Li He flew into a rage. Surnamed Wei, don't slander me. I, Li He, have no idea why young Master Wen was captured. How can you accuse me of being the culprit? If I had the ability to get someone to capture young Master, the Flood Dragon Gang would be under my control. Do I need to do this? Wei Yongtang felt a little regretful after saying this. He was indeed rash with his words. Although Li He had retired from the position of the Flood Dragon Gang's Chaoquan leader, the real power was still in his hands. If he could get in touch with the officials, then Chaoquan and Cao would be under his control. Even if Wen Bin was promoted to the position, the Flood Dragon Gang would be completely under his control. At that time, he would naturally be the Grand Master. Doing this now was disadvantageous to him. Nominally, he had already handed over the Chaoquan leader. If the young master was captured, he would become the target of public criticism, which would make it difficult for him to seize the position. If he really had a plan, he might as well help Wen Bin to get the position. At that time, he would be able to control the princes. Even if he wanted to get the Flood Dragon Gang under his name, it would be better to weaken the one family's influence first than to make trouble now. But if it wasn't Li He, who could it be? Yan Shiwei? If he had the ability, he could just be the leader of Cao. Why did he have to be the leader of the Chaoquan in name only? While everyone was discussing, someone suddenly ran in and shouted, "Something happened! Something big happened!" The Iron Helm Gang, Six Sails Gang, Shun Gang, and the other 4 gangs have announced to merge with the Shun Gang. The Shun Gang is holding a sect-merging meeting. The scene was in an uproar. The Shun Gang merged with the 7 gangs. These 7 sects were small gangs that people usually didn't pay attention to. No one paid attention to their movements. But with the 7 sects joining together, the Shun sect could be compared to an upper-middle-sized gang based on the number of people. More importantly, what gave the Shun Gang the confidence to merge with the other gangs? Wei Yongtang hurriedly said to his daughter, "Have your uncle Su accompany you to the Wan Nian County Yamen to see what Wen Bin has done. Father will go to the Shun Gang to take a look." Wei Xiao nodded in agreement. Su Lin, the helmsman of the Heavenly Eagle clan's Cao, accompanied her to the Wan Nian County Yamen. Wei Yongtang, on the other hand, went straight to the Shun Gate. The people of the other clans who happened to be present also rushed over like a swarm of bees. Li He looked around and said in a deep voice, "Close the door and discuss matters in front of the memorial." Madam Wen and the other Yinyangs looked at each other in dismay. The steward loyal to the Wen family, Zhang Ji, said with a face full of vigilance, "Master He, young master has been captured by the government. If we don't hurry to rescue him, what else do we need to discuss?" Li He's eyes flashed with anger, and he shouted, "We need to discuss the lives of our 2,000 brothers and close to 10,000 family members." Yan Shiwei said unhurriedly, "The president has passed away. Vice President Jun has a stroke, and now young Master Wen has been taken away by the government. How difficult it is for the gang. The Flood Dragon Union is about to sink under the storm. Shouldn't we discuss our future and livelihood? Master He is the leader in the gang in terms of seniority and status. Isn't it right to summon everyone for a discussion? Close the door and reject all guests. We need to discuss matters in the gang." Zhang Ji shouted, "Wait." Li He's face darkened, and he said coldly, "Zhang Ji, what do you want?" Zhang Ji sneered, I also want to ask Master He and Master Yen, what do you two want? Li He lowered his eyelids again and said indifferently, I've already said that we need to discuss the lives of our 2,000 brothers and close to 10,000 family members. Zhang Ji walked to the memorial tablet and knelt on the cattail hassock. He kowtowed to Wen Changxing's memorial tablet 3 times and said loudly, Master Wen, your body is still warm and your spirit is not far away. Do you see that the good brothers you treated as brothers are going to rebel against you? Do you see that? Yan Sherwei was furious and was about to step forward when he was stopped by Li He, who shook his head with a sneer. Zhang Ji stood up and said to the stewards and disciples around him, The leader has passed away, the young master is in court, and Vice Leader Jun is bedridden. What else can we discuss if we don't save them? Yan Sherwei and Li He have repeatedly obstructed the young master's promotion. Now that the young master has been arrested, they've overstepped their authority and summoned all the stewards for a discussion. They obviously have bad intentions. If you're my good brother, stand out and let's go. We don't accept orders from others. Li He chuckled and hid his hands in his sleeves. He looked at him with interest, and then at the stewards who had different expressions on their faces. He smiled without saying a word. The morning hall was silent for a moment before 2 burly men strode out and stood beside Zhang Ji. They said loudly, Steward Zhang is right, we don't accept orders from others. One of them was Lin Tiannan, and the other was Jiang Cheng. They were both Wen Changxing's confidants. As soon as the 2 of them stood out, a few more people came out to stand with them. There were stewards and junior stewards among them. Although there weren't many of them, they were all people with real power in the gang and held important positions. A steward standing in the crowd hesitated for a moment before advising, Brother Zhang, now that the leader has passed away, Vice Leader Jun has suffered a stroke, and young Master Wen is in prison. Our Flood Dragon Triad is in troubled times. We should all work together and not have any internal strife. Why don't we stop and listen to what Master He has to say first? Uft. Zhang Ji glared angrily and said, Can't you see that Li He has the ambition of a wolf? What right does he have to summon all the stewards for a discussion? I, Zhang Ji, am the first to not accept him. If he wants to discuss, he can discuss. But whatever he wants to discuss, it doesn't count in front of me. Let's go. Zhang Ji waved his hand and led his men out. Li He Xiu crossed his arms and smiled, but he still didn't say a word. The morning hall was located in the main room of the 3rd courtyard. From the 3rd courtyard all the way to the main gate, the 3 gates formed a straight line. Because the funeral was being held, the gates were wide open. Both sides were filled with shining white sacrificial offerings and spirit streamers. Zhang Ji and his men strode out of the main door of the 3rd courtyard and went straight to the main door of the 2nd courtyard. Just as they were about to step out of the 2nd courtyard, the main door of the 2nd courtyard closed with a loud bang. Zhang Ji stopped in his tracks and let out a shout. Suddenly, many assassins jumped out and pounced on them with long and short blades. Zhang Ji suddenly turned around and pointed his spear at Li He. He said in shock and anger, Li He, how dare you? Li He was originally facing the main door, as if he was watching him leave. But now he laughed and slowly turned around, leaving his back to Zhang Ji. Behind Li He, sharp blades were raised. Pu-pi-yu! Sounds were heard as the blades pierced into flesh. Blood splattered everywhere, and people continuously fell to the ground. The sacrificial flags on both sides of the road were splattered with blood, like plum blossoms in a snowstorm. Lin Tiannan tightly held onto an assassin's neck, but the other assassin was stabbing the dagger in his hand into Lin Tiannan's chest again and again. Lin Tiannan's chest was riddled with holes, and blood dyed his clothes red. Soon after, blood also flowed out of his mouth. Jiang Cheng's body was covered in blood. He staggered 2 steps and was caught up by the 2 assassins. 2 long blades, one on the left and one on the right, fiercely stabbed into his waist, almost cutting him in half. Li He slowly walked to the front of the coffin. Madame Wen and the concubines were so scared that their faces turned pale and they hurriedly retreated. The main door of the third courtyard slowly closed behind Li He. The moment the door closed, Zhang Ji was in a difficult situation. 7 or 8 long blades were chopping down on his head. Bang! The main door slammed shut. The sound of the door closing did not drown out the desperate and resentful scream. It clearly drilled into everyone's ears. Li He stood still in front of the coffin and slowly turned around. He indifferently said, when Master He was roaming Jianghu, that Zhang guy was still in his mother's womb. He doesn't know why Master He is called Master He, but I don't blame him. Is there anyone else who doesn't know? Stand up and I won't blame you. Chapter 960. The Shun School did not invite all the gangs in Ba to attend the sect-merging assembly. A small gang like the Shun School should not have done anything worthy of others' attention. Even if they invited, they would not come. But this time, the 8 gangs united was indeed a big event in Ba. The Shun School did not forbid outsiders to attend the ceremony. Soon, the hall was crowded with people from all the gangs in Ba. Of course, the leaders of the biggest gangs would not come, but they also sent their trusted informants to inquire about the situation. Ever since the Shun Gate was split up, this might be the first time the empty gathering hall was filled with people. So many people from various sects had gathered here. The leaders of the 7 gangs, including the Iron Helm Gang, the 6 Sail School, and the Shun Society, stood solemnly in front of the hall, meticulously burning incense, saluting and greeting the master according to the rules. Qiao Mu was wearing a new suit. Although the bruises on his face were still there, he was full of energy and his face was ruddy. The 3 brothers of the Gu family were among the brothers of the Shun School. He had seen Miss Gu's kung fu. It was said that her 3 brothers were more powerful than her. With these 4 masters, no one would come to make trouble in the Shun School today. Yesterday, he also saw how Dugu Wentao of the Dugu family subdued Li He and Yan Sherwei. With the power of the Dugu family, it was completely reasonable for them to ask Jun Ruyan to hide behind closed doors and then pressure the government to punish Wenbin. Lady Gu had said that the one who truly wanted to help the Shun Gate wasn't the Dugu clan, but rather the successor of Zhang Sini. This person was even able to order around the Dugu clan. Up until now, he had never seen this person, nor did he know his name or identity. However, he had already firmly believed in Lady Gu's words. Qiao Mu was also a veteran in Jianghu. He was knowledgeable and experienced. He had received the help of a great benefactor for no reason and was promised such a great benefit. Was he not on guard at all? Indeed, he was not, because he had nothing to be on guard against. He had nothing that could be seen by others. With their power, they had people and money. The only thing they could rely on was probably the Shun School, which was about to rot soon. If they could really make the Shun School stand up again, as Miss Gu said, even if they really used him, even if they killed him, so what? Besides, he was already desperate. His life was saved by others. Qiao Mu did not believe that there would be a free lunch in the world. He had already staked everything on this one throw. Seeing that the 7 gang leaders who led the gang members into the Shun Gate had finished offering incense, Qiao Mu tightened his belt and walked forward. His thighs were still swollen, and he staggered a little, but his gait was extremely steady and powerful, with a solemn expression. Everyone's gazes were focused on him. The people of the Shun Gate were excited. Many of them had tears in their eyes. The spectators were curious, amazed, cynical, and doubtful. But at this moment, no one spoke. The hall was abnormally quiet. Qiao Mu solemnly burned a stick of incense to the ancestors' memorial tablet. When he turned around, Zhu Yiqing, who was wearing a short jacket and a red silk belt, came over with a tray with a bowl of wine on it. Qiao Mu picked up the wine bowl and glanced at the people of the Shun School, who were standing solemnly under the steps. He did not even look at the people of other sects who were watching the ceremony in the corridor on both sides. He said loudly, "Brothers, since the canal transport came into being, there have been canal handlers. Our ancestors supported us with an oar, a boat, and a pole to support us and support our families. But the wind and waves on the river are dangerous. When the boats are sailing, there is always the risk of capsizing and destroying the boat and losing both the people and the goods. We have to pass through the locks and docks, and there are many difficulties, extortion and blackmail. It is very difficult for us who drive boats on the water. So, we have to form gangs and establish sections. The purpose of forming a faction was not to commit crimes, nor was it to oppress the good. It was to unite everyone and fight against the dangers of the river, against the corrupt officials, and against the local tyrants who closed the lock and docks. But today, the sects on the Ba have gone against the original intention of the ancestors. They cheat each other, undermine each other, and are even controlled and used by others. It is already the 5th generation of the Shun school in my hands, but I am unfilial. My ancestors' great family business has been ruined by me, but I have always been determined to revive the Shun school. Today, the Iron Rudder sect, the Six Sails school, the Shun society, all the brothers are willing to join us and join us. I am very grateful. Brothers, today is the day when the 7 sects merge into the Shun school. From now on, we will be as close as one family. We will share blessings and difficulties. Today is just the beginning. I hope that all the heroes on the Ba can join us. The waves are high, and the risks are high, but we are in the same boat. Let's drink this bowl of wine. The heads of the 7 sects who lined up in front of the hall each held a bowl of wine and drank it up with him. Chiao Mu gulped down the wine in his bowl, put it down, and said, "The Shun school has the help of all the good brothers. Today the 8 sects are united, and the tasks in this sect should be clarified. Since the 7 sects have joined the Shun school, you can no longer keep your original banners. From now on, the 7 of you are the 7 stewards of the Shun school. At present, you are still in charge of your original people and ships." This was already discussed. Han Yuantang and the other 6 people cupped their fists and said yes. They walked behind Chiao Mu and stood still with their hands clasped behind their backs. Chiao Mu said again, "We live in the Chao family. It is inevitable that we will meet the heroes of the 3 mountains and 5 peaks. If we don't have the strength, we will be bullied. In a sect, the Chao family is indispensable. Now, the 8 sects of our sect are united. After a discussion with the stewards, we have elected a popular person to be the helmsman of the Chao family. Miss Gu," Chiao Mu shouted. The disciples of the Shun school parted to the left and right, and Gu Zhuting, who was in a white short dress, strode out. There was a commotion in the crowd. Everyone knew that this lady had fought against 100 people and defeated over 100 experts of the Flood Dragon Triad. However, it was the first time that many people had seen her. She had a beautiful appearance, a slim figure, a slender waist, and a straight chest. She was full of femininity and did not look like a hero of the pugilistic world at all. If her moon-white short garment was replaced by a wide-sleeved gauze long skirt, and the saber hanging on her slender waist was replaced by a medicinal hoe hanging on her shoulder, there would be a bright moon and osmanthus branches by her side, and a white rabbit would be hopping and hopping under her feet. But she was actually the helmsman of the Chao Quan. Chiao Mu said loudly, "From now on, Miss Gu is the first deputy head of the Shun school, the helmsman of the Chao family." In front of the hall, the disciples of the 7 sects who had just joined the Shun school and the disciples of the Shun school all cupped their hands to salute to Gu Zhuting and said loudly, "Helmsman Gu!" Everyone spoke in unison, their voices echoing loudly in the hall. It was unusually solemn. Unexpectedly at this moment, a fussy voice suddenly rang out. It was spoken in Chinese, but the tone was somewhat exotic. "Ah, I swear in the name of Allah, this is the most beautiful Oriental woman I have ever seen. Her waist is slender, thinner than the sick body tortured by unrequited love. Her eyes are more affectionate than the crescent moon in the sky. When she walks, she is like a breeze, gently stepping over sand dunes. I fall for her, I am fascinated by her." The solemn atmosphere in the hall of the Shun school was gone. Some people were talking, some were laughing, and some were looking around. It was a mess at once. Young Fan stood there and groaned inwardly. He and Abdullah came here to watch the fun. But they didn't know that this guy was a playboy who couldn't change his bad habit of flirting with women. He was showing off his talent in poetry again. Yang Fan knew that today was the big day when the seventh sex merged into the Shun School. If it went well, the Flood Dragon Society would also have a result in the next 2 days. With the martial strength of the Gu siblings and the support of the Duga family, Yang Fan was not worried that there would be any trouble. Of course, there would be trouble sooner or later, but not now. It must happen at the end of January or the beginning of February next year. If there was no big trouble by then, he would take the initiative to create one. Today, Yang Fan really came to watch the fun as a spectator. Even Gu Zhuting didn't know that he was here. Who knew that Abdullah, who was standing there watching the Japanese scenery, would say such words when he saw Gu Zhuting? In the uproar, Xiaomu frowned and thought that someone really came to make trouble. He hurriedly winked at Zhuai Yiqing, and the Gu brothers and the kung fu experts of the Shun School, who were hidden in the shadows, immediately moved quietly to the place where the sound came from. Today, the Shun School inexplicably merged with other sects, and from Xiaomu's words, it seemed that he wanted to restore the former glory of the Shun School. If he restored the former glory, didn't it mean that all the sects on Ba had to surrender to him? So the people of the big sects kept sneering with their arms crossed. However, they hadn't figured out the ins and outs of the Shun Gate yet, so there was no need to be the first bird to stick out. They didn't think that someone would finally speak first. Everyone looked over, not knowing which sect it was that couldn't restrain themselves and made a move. Gu Zhuting suddenly turned her head and raised her eyebrows like swords. Her sharp eyes suddenly looked at the place where the sound came from. Everyone shivered when they saw her. Previously, they saw her slender waist and graceful gait, which was far from the image of a heroine in their imagination. Now that she was full of heroic spirit, there was a feeling of a sharp sword being unsheathed. When Gu Zhuting looked at him, Abdullah felt even better about himself. Like a peacock showing strong desire, he took a big step, opened his arms, and praised loudly. She was like a plain shepherdess, her natural charm captivating people. How could this be compared to the pretentiousness of the city girls who put on makeup and put on makeup? Her bright and beautiful eyes are like a sharp arrow piercing through the clouds, piercing my heart. You are such a charming little vixen. I really want to bury my head in your chest that is smoother than an ostrich's egg and suck your rare sweet spring. Hiss. Many people secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. The previous words of praise were fine. It wasn't that the women of the Central Plains couldn't be praised for their beauty. Although what he said was a bit explicit with the waist and eyebrows, in fact, with a little embellishment, it would be no different from Chao Zijin's Luo Shinfu. But what he said next was too explicit. Was he openly flirting with the helmsman of the Shun School in the assembly of the Shun School? The people around Abdullah acted like Abdullah had become a plague patient, all of them scurrying out of the way. Even Yang Fan immediately fled. For a moment, the only people left at Abdullah's side were the talkative Abbas and a few Arab warriors in brown robes. Chapter 961. The talkative Abbas had just jumped out, but before he could help his master, Gu Zhuting had grabbed him by the collar and pulled him to the side. Gu Zhuting didn't seem to walk very fast, but with just a few twists of her waist, she had already appeared in front of Abdullah. Abdullah was completely unaware of the impending disaster. He didn't know that his praises, which could make Western ladies feel smug, were already a great offense to the reserved Eastern ladies. And if he were to flirtatiously offend other Eastern ladies, they would probably call him a lecher. But this lady in front of him was someone who could take a life with just a raise of her hand. As soon as Lady Gu appeared in front of him, Abdullah immediately placed his hand on his chest and gracefully performed a gentleman's salute. He courteously smiled and said, Abdullah Shaman bin Aziz bin Hakam sends his regards to the beautiful lady. Can you bestow your name upon me? Gu Zhuting glared at him and lightly raised a hand. Her wrist was white and delicate, and her fingers were long and slender, like an elegant orchid. But by now many people in Ba knew that although this Lady Gu didn't have the power to shatter rocks, her power was not inferior in the slightest. Everyone held their breath, waiting for Abdullah to lie on the ground and retch while clutching his throat, or for his limbs to be dislocated and twisted as if he had polio. Then he would be carried out by his subordinates, who were wrapped in long cloth, as if they were clothes. But the newly appointed helmsman of the Shun School's Chao Quan raised her slender hand, but only elegantly brushed the hair at the side of her temples, and lightly said, "Mr. Abdullah, our Middle Earth's customs are different from your West. Your explicit words are impolite." Gu Zhuting really intended to make a move and use this Arab merchant to establish her might. But when she raised her hand, she was pleasantly surprised to see Yang Fan. Yang Fan was leaning against a thick pillar in the back, smiling and shaking his head at her. Thus, the angry little wild cat retracted its sharp claws and used its soft flesh as a cushion to pounce at the person. "Ah, I'm truly sorry. Although I've come to the East several times, I haven't had many opportunities to meet a free woman as beautiful as you. I should apologize to you. Beautiful lady, may I know your name?" Gu Zhuting said indifferently, "In our Central Plains, a woman's name can't be easily revealed to outsiders, just like how women in your country shouldn't unveil themselves in front of outsiders." A hint of surprise flitted through Yang Fan's eyes. Women of status in the Abbasid Caliphate had to cover their faces in front of outsiders. Yang Fan had heard from Xiaoman that there were Arabs doing business with the Yang clan, but he hadn't expected Gu Zhuting to know of this custom. After Gu Zhuting finished speaking, she glanced deeply at Yang Fan before turning around and leaving. It was obvious that Al Lang didn't want to expose his identity. She was in the limelight now, so she couldn't reveal anything. Abdullah didn't get Gu Zhuting's name, so he looked very depressed. He shook his head and said to Yang Fan, who had returned to his side, "Dear Mu, in your country, it is harder to win the favor of a lady than to hunt a cunning fox in the grassland." Yang Fan smiled and said, "Mr. Abdullah came to the Central Plains to do business. You shouldn't put the cart before the horse." Abdullah said righteously, "What's the purpose of doing business? To make money. Then what's the purpose of making money? Mu, the principle is to enjoy oneself. If you don't figure this out, you're putting the cart before the horse. There's a proverb in my hometown. There are 3 great joys in life: eating fat meat, riding a fat horse, and marrying meat. If a man blindly pursues money and neglects those beautiful women, what a sad thing it is." While the two were whispering, Gu Zhuting had already walked to Chiao Mu's side and stood behind him to the right. Chiao Mu said in a clear voice, "When the 8 gangs merge into one, the population will increase. So many families, old and young, need to eat, and it will be even more difficult to eat. I think everyone knows this and is most worried about it. Here, I can tell everyone that there's no need to worry at all. Our Shun Gate has obtained the assistance of a noble. Not only has he agreed to be our Shun Gate's head of the river estuary, he's even provided us with 50 of the newest large ships." As soon as he said this, the whole hall burst into an uproar, not to mention the disciples standing below. Even the leaders of the 7 small gangs who had just joined were overjoyed. Before, they only knew that the Shun School must have a lot of power now. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to recruit Lord He and Lord Yen of the Flood Dragon cult. But they didn't expect that they could get 50 new ships right away. Chiao Mu was also full of smiles. He pressed his hands down and said loudly, "Let's welcome Mr. Dugu." A scribes and Cyan stepped out of the crowd, cupped his hands to Chiao Mu, and said with a smile, "I'm Dugu Wentao. Greetings, head." Chiao Mu said, "Mr. Dugu, from today on, you will be the branch leader of our Shun School." Dugu Wentao bowed to the crowd and said with a smile, "I've already placed an order with the Yangtze shipyard for 50 new ships. Next spring, brothers, you only need to rush to Yangzhou to receive the ships, and then load the grains and ship them. "Greetings, Dugu helmsman," the disciples below the steps said in unison, their blood boiling. 50 new ships, and all of them were big ships, which immediately solved the problem that the Shun School had a large population, few ships, and insufficient shipping capacity after the merger. Moreover, the ships they used to use, some of which were sewn and patched, were from the last years of the Sui dynasty, which should have been eliminated long ago. Now that they had new ships, the risk of sailing was much smaller. How could they not be ecstatic? For a moment, there was a lot of discussion in the hall. The disciples who came to watch the ceremony looked at the scholar with the compound surname of Dugu, whom they had never seen before, and also whispered to each other to inquire about his background. In fact, they had already expected that Miss Gu would be the helmsman of the Shun School. What they cared about was who was the helmsman of the Shun School. It was useless to only have dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of ships and tens of thousands of brothers. They also needed the support of the Shun School. Along the way from Yangzhou, they had to go through the Yangtze River, Bian River, Yellow River, Wei River, and many checkpoints, docks, and layers of gates. If they did not have a strong backer, the more ships they had, the more they would be exploited. By the time they arrived in Chang, and they would have worked for nothing, and they would not be able to maintain such a large gang. Therefore, if they did not have a strong Shun School, they might as well get a few broken ships, and at least they could get enough food and clothing. The 8 gangs merged into one, and they had a martial arts master like Miss Gu. In the end, whether the Shun School could stand firm or not was not the key. The key was whether they had a backer or not, and how strong their backer was. If they did not have a backer, they would collapse by themselves without the suppression of other gangs. The major gangs were concerned about this, not only because they wanted to know whether the Shun School could stand firm, but also because they wanted to assess the strength of the Shun School and determine how they should treat them in the future. It had been a long time since the Shun School had unified the Jianghu, and their current rallying power was not as strong as before. Nowadays, the leaders of the various gangs would not suppress the Shun School just because of their name. However, with the addition of a powerful gang, there would always be one more competitor. For this purpose, they would suppress them if they could. In this way, they needed to understand what the Shun School's trump card was, and who was supporting them from behind. Now, the results were out. This person was called Dugu Wentao. Who was Dugu Wentao, and who was the person behind him? Originally, no one knew Dugu Wentao. Although the Dugu family and the group of people on Ba's side were very close, they lived in 2 completely different worlds. Usually, they did not have any interaction with them. However, this time the people in the gangs quickly thought of the Dugu family. Perhaps the Dugu family was not the only one with the surname Dugu in Chang and city. However, the Shun School had no connections in the field of transportation, and could only follow behind the big gangs to pick up scraps. Now that the Shun School had just merged and gained a lot of manpower, they were confident that they could act as the Shun School and ensure that the government would not take too much from them. Moreover, they could help them fight for business and provide 50 ships in one go. Who else but the Dugu family could do it? In the crowd of spectators, people left in a hurry. They were all sent by various sects to inquire about the news. They had to report this matter to the gang master immediately. The Shun School was no longer a pushover, and they had to be careful with the Shun School. These people left too early, so they did not see the next scene that was even more shocking. Qiao Mu introduced the 2 helmsmen of the Chaoguan School and the Shun School, and 7 stewards to everyone. When he was making specific assignments after the expansion of the Shun School, a disciple suddenly rushed in breathlessly and shouted, "Sect Master, the Flood Dragon Society! The Flood Dragon Society is here!" Qiao Mu was stunned and looked toward the door. Another disciple ran in from outside with a pale face and shouted, "Sect Master, Master He, and Master Yen from the Flood Dragon Society. Led all the people of the Flood Dragon Society here." The gathering hall was in an uproar again. The Flood Dragon Society finally took action. Were they going to destroy the Shun School? The people of the various gangs who had just joined the Shun School were in an uproar. They had unconsciously stepped back, lest they would be splashed with blood when the fight started. What if some ignorant people also thought that they were from the Shun school? Wouldn't they all die here? Chiao Mu and the several leaders who had just joined the Shun school all knew about the deal between Li He, Yan Shuwei, and Miss Gu. Even so, they were still a little nervous when they heard that the Flood Dragon Society had come out in full force. They all looked at Gu Zhuting. Gu Zhuting was now the helmsman of the Chaoquan school of the Shun school. She would not decline her responsibility. She cupped her hands to Chiao Mu and said, "Sect Master, don't worry. I'll go and have a look." After saying that, Gu Zhuting walked out of the hall. One person, one sword. On the long street, countless people came in a mighty array, crowding the whole long street. There were countless people watching on both sides of the street. The whole Ba was in an uproar, and even the roofs on both sides were full of people. The Flood Dragon Society finally took action, and they turned out in full force. The Shun school had just merged with the other 7 gangs, and there were more than 1,500 people in total. Together, they could be regarded as a medium-sized gang. 1,500 people versus 2,000 people. This was a fight for sure. The 3 months of winter on Ba were the most leisurely 3 months of the year for the coachmen. The strong coachmen gambled, drank, and slept with women, but they still had too much energy to do. Just thinking about the big fight of thousands of people made people's blood boil. Before the two sides started fighting, they were already howling and shouting excitedly like wolves in the moon. Gu Zhuting was dressed in white with a short sword at her waist. She stood on the long street, graceful and beautiful like a peony. On the opposite side, 2,000 strong men gathered into a rolling torrent. Under the leadership of Li He and Yan Shuwei, they walked toward her. Chapter 962. They're going to fight. They're going to fight. Rong Shu climbed up the roof while trembling. The disciples of the Flood Dragon Union were surging toward the Chiao family of the Shun Gate. At the entrance of the Chiao family, a beautiful woman in white stood with her sword in her hand, her clothes fluttering in the wind. Rong Shu was so excited that he took out a jujube from his pocket and stuffed it into his mouth while shivering. He had this problem. Whenever he was too excited, angry, or fearful, his body would tremble uncontrollably. Rong Shu was a member of the 5 Elements gang. Seeing that the people of the Flood Dragon Union were getting closer and that the people on the street had all moved to the sides of the road, his heart almost jumped out of his throat. He condescendingly looked down at that smooth school's Chao Quan Duo Shu suddenly felt that such a pretty girl should be the leader of the Shun Gate. Who would be willing to let such a beauty be bullied? With such a leader, as long as she winked and pursed her lips, everyone would pounce on her like rabid dogs fighting for a bone. But the men of the Shun Gate were too unmanly. How could they let such a pretty girl come out alone? Even if she was really good at fighting, could she fight 2,000 people? She would be exhausted to death. That was impossible. However, if he were to mess up her belt or tear her clothes during the fight, revealing her delicate skin and white flesh, and if he were to accidentally let her pull off her doo-doo. Rong Shu's thoughts of having tender feelings for the fairer sex were quickly replaced by wretchedness. He carefully moved to the edge of the roof. If such an erotic scene really happened, he had to make sure that he was the one who saw it most vividly. He saw Master He and Master Yin striding forward with their men. He saw them stop when they were 6 meters away from the pretty girl in white, and he saw Master He and Master Yin walking forward alone. TSK, as expected of a person of status. At this time, he was still trying to be polite before resorting to force. He even cupped his fists and saluted the little beauty. "What are you cupping for? Hurry up and tear off her clothes. Why are you kneeling on one knee? Do you have to be so particular? Kneel." Rong Shu stared fixedly at this astonishing scene in front of him. He suddenly lost the ability to think, and his whole body was like a stone falling from the eaves. He wasn't wrong. Li He and Yen Sherwei were indeed bowing to Gu Zhuting. Not only him, but countless people on the street also saw it. The scene was dead silent. The cold wind rustled, and the last leaf on the top of the old elm tree was blown off, swirling towards the ground. A crow stretched its neck and cawed twice. Spreading its wings, it flew away from the straw hat-shaped nest. Wei Yongtang was very confused when he heard that Li He and Yen Sherwei had led all the members of the Flood Dragon Gang to the Shun Gate. Judging from their previous abnormal actions, it was obvious that they were disloyal to the Flood Dragon Gang. Perhaps it was because Jun Rian had suffered a stroke and the Flood Dragon Union had lost its leader. So the two of them were tempted by some big gang and wanted to find a better one. Or perhaps they had reached an agreement to snatch the position of the leader. However, when young Master Wen was arrested by the government for some unknown crime, they suddenly led all the disciples to attack the Shun Union. This was simply unreasonable. When Gu Zhuting walked out of Jui Hall, many people who were watching the commotion followed her out. Then they quickly flashed to both sides, making their stand clear. Wei Yongtang also led his men to the side, wanting to see what Li He and Yen Sherwei were up to. In the end, he saw Li He and Yen Sherwei kneel to Gu Zhuting, and then the 2,000 members of the Flood Dragon Gang retreated, like a receding tide. Wei Yongtang's mind instantly went blank. It was only when Gu Zhuting helped Li He and Yen Sherwei up and led them to the Shun Gate's hall. Someone exclaimed, "The Flood Dragon Gang will join the Shun Gate!" that Wei Yongtang woke up from his shock. Wei Yongtang wanted to chase after them. He wanted to ask Li He and Yen Sherwei why they had betrayed the Flood Dragon Gang. But he had only taken 2 steps when an inexplicable chill suddenly struck his heart. How could a mere Shun Gate subdue Li He and Yen Sherwei? Even if the Shun Gate was affiliated with the Dugas, small gangs like the Iron Helm Gang and the Six Sails Gang would rush to join them. But the Flood Dragon Gang was different. Li He and Yen Sherwei had given up their positions as vice leaders and were willing to become stewards of the Shun Gate. The more Wei Yongtang thought about it, the more terrified he became. He felt as if a terrible conspiracy was quietly unfolding on Ba, but he didn't know where the mastermind was. He watched as Li He and Yen Sherwei followed Gu Zhuting into the Shun Gate. He didn't have the courage to take another step forward. Li He had cleansed the Flood Dragon Gang with lightning speed and eliminated the dissenting voices in the Flood Dragon Gang. While everyone was still in shock, he had immediately made the decision to join the Shun Gate. It was actually a very smart move. He had lived on Ba all his life, and no one knew this place better than he did. Every gang here was like a shark. They hunted their prey together and bullied the weak together. But when one of them was injured, it would immediately become the prey in the mouths of its companions, torn apart and eaten by them. The Flood Dragon Gang was now the injured shark. The reason why the gangs hadn't taken action was that everything had happened too quickly. When Changxing had died without any illness, and Jun Rian had suffered an inexplicable stroke. The 2 incidents had happened on the same day, and the giant sharks who had smelled the scent of blood hadn't had time to react. If time dragged on, it was hard to guarantee that these gangs wouldn't interfere. Whether they would interfere openly or secretly support someone, he wouldn't be able to control the Flood Dragon Gang anymore. At that time, the Flood Dragon Gang would definitely fall apart. Even if he joined the Shun Gate, it would be difficult for him to guarantee his own interests. Li He was able to hold the power of Chao Quan for a long time, even though he had already resigned from his post. This showed how scheming he was. He would either not do anything, or he would do it to the extreme. The Gu brothers' threat to his grandson was actually only one of the reasons why he was willing to give in. What really made him make up his mind was the conversation he had with Gu Zhuting. He knew that the other party had powerful martial arts and great influence in the government. That was enough. Li He believed in the saying, "Only a strong dragon can cross the river." Since the other party dared to brazenly kill Master Wen and force Vice Master Jun to stay in seclusion, there was nothing he wouldn't dare to do. He was already in his 60s, and still had a few more years to live. As long as he succeeded in this matter, he would be able to leave an iron family business for his grandson. Therefore, he took the gamble. The Jiao Dragon Society joining the Shun Gate was the real uproar in Bashang. The entire Bashang was shocked by the Jiao Dragon Society's strange actions. Wei Yongtang hurriedly returned home. Just as he ordered someone to gather all the stewards for a discussion, Su Lin came back from the Wan Nian County Yamen with his daughter, Wei Xiaoxiao. Xiaoxiao, what did Wenbin do? Wei Yongtang went up to his daughter as soon as he saw her. Unexpectedly, Wei Xiaoxiao's face turned green as she said, "Father, don't mention this person to me again. I don't want to know anything about him." She then flicked her sleeves and left. Wei Yongtang looked at Su Lin in astonishment. Su Lin smiled bitterly and said, "No wonder Miss is angry. That young master one is really Sigh." It turned out that the person who sued Wenbin was a member of the Six Sails gang. This person used to be a member of the Flood Dragon gang. Once his son and daughter-in-law were on a ship returning from Yangzhou to Cheng. Wenbin happened to be on that ship. When he saw that this person's daughter-in-law was quite pretty, he had evil thoughts. In the end, Wenbin failed to get what he wanted. Instead, he was seen by the woman's husband. Wenbin's expression turned ugly when he heard about it. In order to vent his anger, Wenbin tied the couple up and threw them into the river. When he returned, he told the family that the couple broke the rules of the ship and was punished according to the gang rules. The old man was helpless when he heard this. However, there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. Gradually, the truth leaked out. When the old man found out about the real cause of his son and daughter-in-law's death, he angrily complained to the leader. How could the leader punish his son? Instead, he expelled the old man from the Flood Dragon gang. The old man then went to Wannian County to complain about his wrongdoings, but was rejected because there was no evidence. When Wenbin heard the news, he sent people to break his legs. If he didn't kill the old man, it would have angered both men and gods, and the old man wouldn't have lived until now. However, this was 3 years ago. Why did Wannian County suddenly investigate this case? This person was now a member of the Six Sails gang. The Six Sails gang had just merged with the Shun gang. The truth was clear. This was obviously the doing of the Shun gang. It was the doing of Dugu Wentao, the helmsman of Tsauko. Based on this, there was probably something fishy about Jun Rian's stroke. If Jun Rian's stroke was fake, it meant that he was afraid of the power behind her. How much power did the other party have? A little girl from the Shun gang fought against 100 people alone. President Wen died without any illness. This was a show of force. Jun Rian was bedridden from a stroke. She used the power of the government to arrest Wenbin. This was a show of force. They were aggressive and hostile. At this moment, Wei Yongtang didn't dare to underestimate the Shun gang. However, he didn't think further. So what if the Shun gang rose? It was just the fall of the Flood Dragon gang and the rise of the Shun gang. All the gangs in Ba had a new partner. Could it be that the Shun gang really had the ability to unify the water transportation and recreate the glory of the Shun gang at the end of the Sui dynasty? Wei Yongtang shook his head in disdain. He said to Su Lin, "I didn't expect Wenbin to commit such an evil act. How can such a scum be a match for my daughter? I'll have to trouble you to make a trip to the Wen family and ask Madam Wen to return the marriage contract. The marriage between the Wei and Wen families will be annulled." Su Lin was stunned. He said in surprise, "Annulled? Then the Flood Dragon gang." Wei Yongtang snorted coldly. "You've gone to the Wan Nian County Yamen. You still don't know what happened in Ba. Li He and Yen Sherwei led 2,000 disciples into the Shun gang. The Flood Dragon gang no longer exists." Chapter 963. Yang Fan was very satisfied with the series of actions that Gu Zhuting had taken regarding Ba. Yang Fan had only given her a goal, a few names of relevant people, and the final result that should be achieved. As for the specifics of how to achieve it, Yang Fan was completely free to let Gu Zhuting do as she pleased. Gu Zhuting was a veteran in Jianghu. She did a better job than Yang Fan of interfering and giving directions. Gu Zhuting persuaded the School of Obedience, absorbed the 7 gangs, and swallowed the Flood Dragon Society in just 3 days. Of course, the next step was to rein in its sharpness and digest the inside. Even if the School of Obedience was originally a giant python, it would still take some time to digest after swallowing a buffalo. Moreover, it had swallowed the Flood Dragon Society, which was more than 10 times stronger than itself. Now that the School of Obedience had merged with the 9 gangs, and with the full support of the Duga family, it had already become a first-class gang on Ba. It already had the ability to stir up a bloody storm on Ba. The people of Ba said that they were people of Jianghu, but compared to the great Jianghu that was the imperial court, the wild Jianghu was not even a small puddle. Who would lower their heads to look at this small puddle? However, the rolling torrent that was about to engulf Chang and would start from this small puddle. Living at the top of the imperial court and far away from Jianghu, if the Jianghu and the imperial court were to mix together, what kind of scene would that be? Thinking of this, Yang Fan could not help but smile. Abdullah looked at him strangely and said, "My dear Mu, what makes you smile so happily?" At this time, the two had already left the Qiao family's Hall of Righteousness and were walking side by the Wei River. Yang Fan's bodyguards and Abdullah's warriors followed behind them at a moderate pace. Abbas was the only one following behind the two of them. Nothing. Yang Fan smiled and said, "I'm going back to Chang'an soon. What plans do you have, Mr. Abdullah?" Abdullah rolled his eyes and said, "I'm also going to the city. My jewelry, slaves, spices, and expensive tapestries can only be sold at a good price in the city." Yang Fan smiled and said, "That's just right. You and I are going the same way. Is Mr. Abdullah going to live in the city?" Abdullah said, No. I'm going to the city to discuss business, but the goods are still here. I have to come back at night. Especially today, I met such a charming lady here, so I am even more reluctant to leave." Abdullah beamed with joy. "I want to pursue her passionately. I want to ask Allah to grant us a chance to share a bed and sleep with her." Yang Fan slowly stopped, and the smile in his eyes gradually became cold. "Mr. Abdullah, please don't make fun of my woman anymore. Otherwise, I may really tie you up like an ostrich egg and sink you into the Wei River to draw the rare sweet spring water, even if you are sent by Shin Mu." Abbas looked at the serious Yang Fan in surprise, and then looked at his master. It was rare that he did not interrupt. Yang Fan said righteously, "We men from the Central Plains have always been very petty in this aspect." Abdullah said in surprise, "I did not reveal my identity to you. How did you know?" Yang Fan turned his head to look at the flowing Wei River and said lightly, "Because I am smarter than you think." Abdullah immediately smiled and said, Good. General, Abdullah promises you that I will not do anything rude to that lady again." Yang Fan glanced at him and said, "That better be the case. I hope you did not come all the way here just to show off in front of me." Abdullah laughed dryly and shrugged his shoulders. "Actually, I am usually like this. I did not mean to offend, General, but you men from the Central Plains are too rigid and reserved when it comes to relationships. You are not humorous enough and not bold enough." Yang Fan frowned and said, "All right, I don't have the time to listen to you. Now that the plan has begun, and Z has been set up, there are still 2 months before the mid-game strangulation, and only 3 months until the dust settles. During this period, I hope that you can fully cooperate with me and that there will be no mistakes. 3 months? 3 months. A month had passed, and Chang, and had become a world wrapped in silver. Everything had withered, and the pedestrians on the streets had become sparse. It seemed that the whole world had gone into hibernation under the cold winter. But Wu Yizong was busy all the time. He was like a hard-working woodpecker, sometimes flying to the east, sometimes flying to the west, pecking here and there a few times bang-bang sounds. Under his supervision, the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Works were in full swing. The Ministry of Revenue was conducting a census of the population of Chang and the surrounding prefectures and counties according to his arrangements. They ordered the prefectures within the Guanyi Pass to report the latest household statistics and to check the amount of grain stored in Chang's warehouses. The Ministry of Works was calculating the cost and manpower needed to repair the palace, government offices, widen the roads, repair the city walls, and dredge the moat, as well as the amount of grain needed for transportation in the coming year. Construction could not be carried out during the cold winter. They had to wait until the next spring, which was the beginning of the year and the most important time for farming. So they had to wait for the statistics from the Ministry of Revenue to calculate the number of able-bodied men that could be transferred without affecting the spring plowing. Only then could they carry out the next step. At the same time, Wu Yizong was also in close contact with the generals of the Chang and garrison. He also wrote to the imperial court, suggesting that troops should be stationed in the Guanyi Pass. It went without saying that the purpose of stationing troops to build the palace and dredge the moat was for the sake of military power. On the other hand, Yang Fan's side was much quieter than Wu Yizong's. Yang Fan seemed to only be interested in his own small territory. He had designated a large area in the northern suburbs of the palace as the barracks for the 1,000 horseman battalion. The area was so large that it could accommodate not just 1,000 horsemen, but even 10,000. In the barracks, he ordered the soldiers to level and widen the drill ground. He built 4 polo fields and 6 kuji courts. If it were not for the heavy snow and the sudden cold weather, Yang Fan would have changed the entire northern suburbs of the palace before the Ministry of Works sent craftsmen over. The people from the censorate and the Ministry of Justice were still working hard. The emperor wanted to move the capital, so he first had to clean up the officials in Guangzhou and rectify the local law and order. Chun Dong and Sun Yuxuan from the Ministry of Justice, and Hu Yuanli and Shiyu from the censorate had a clear division of labor. One was in charge of law, and the other was in charge of the officials. After the Ministry of Justice's crackdown, the prisons were filled with ruffians and the number of wanderers in Chang and city decreased sharply. Those who swindle, bully, and dominate the market were also severely punished. They also accepted complaints from the people and reviewed all the case files in Chang and in recent years. During this process, if there were any officials who engaged in corruption or violated the law and order, the case would be handed over to the censorate for Hu Yuanli and Shiyu to take over. Apart from this channel, Hu Yuanli and Shiyu could not really clean up the officials' cases. If the emperor wanted to move the capital, he would have to make a big move on the officials in Guangzhou. He would purge some, transfer some, promote some, and demote some. The vacated positions would be filled by the emperor's trusted officials. This was for the purpose of political stability. The decision-making power was in the emperor's hands, so they could only catch the small fish and shrimp. Censorate, Hu and Shiyu could only catch the small fish and shrimp. So procurator one could only catch the small fish and shrimp. When Ao had been in charge of the counties under the jurisdiction of the Chang and local government for a long time, he was arrogant and noisy, but he did not solve many serious criminal cases. Most of them were neighborhood disputes, theft, and adultery. Wu Yizong almost laughed his teeth off when he heard that. But even so, the 6 departments of Gong, Granary, Revenue, Army, Judiciary, and Shi were all busy. The Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Justice, and the censorate were all officials who came from the imperial court, so the specific affairs could not be separated from these local officials. Not only them, but the whole Chang and local government, including the prefectural magistrate Lu Xiantian, was also busy. Later, Lu Xiantian had a brainwave and adopted a people-to-people strategy. He reported to the Ministry of Revenue every day, the junior magistrate to the Ministry of Works, the judge to the Ministry of Justice, and the censorate. The 6 officials were on standby in the government, and Chu Tianqing, the military advisor, was in charge of passing down orders and mediating. In this way, it was much more orderly. When the emperor was about to move to the west, all the high-ranking officials and dignitaries in Chang and city used all kinds of means. Some wanted to show off and get promoted, some wanted to escape, and some wanted to take advantage of the good opportunity to bring down their enemies. The whole Chang and city was in chaos, and the small Jianghu world of Ba, which was ignored by everyone, was not peaceful in the past month. The Shun faction, which had been in decline for a long time, suddenly rose to power. Somehow, it managed to curry favor with the Duga family. Then it merged with 8 other factions, including the Flood Dragon Gang, and became a first-rate faction in Bashang. In the past month, the Shun school had been integrating and digesting internally, and some dissidents were eliminated. At the same time, Miss Gu, the helmsman of the Chaoquan school, and Duga Wenao, the helmsman of the Tsako school, accompanied Master Qiao to visit all the gangs and soon formed an alliance with the Life League and the Three River Society. Because the main members of these 3 gangs were concentrated in the east of the town, they were called ASEAN. And the 5 Elements Association, the Circle School, and the Taiping Gang immediately formed an alliance to oppose ASEAN, and they were called the West League. As soon as the East and West Leagues were established, they began to draw in and annex the small and medium-sized gangs. Wei Yongtang's Tianyin Gang chose to join the West League. Once there was a clear division, hostility naturally grew. These boorish Jianghu men usually got drunk and started fights, not to mention now that they had a clear opponent. Fights between the 2 sides occurred frequently, and the friction became more and more intense. One morning, the cold sunlight tore through the clouds, dispersing the darkness on the ground. In a small alley, a few frozen corpses were revealed. These were the gang members of the Circle sect. There was no way to find the culprit, but the people of Jianghu did not need evidence. As long as they were certain that it was you, that was enough. The next morning, 4 gang members of the Three River Society were found lying naked on the street leading to the dock. A layer of frost had formed on their cold bodies. The conflict had escalated. The West League's revenge came so quickly and so ruthlessly. The East and West Leagues were immediately at each other's throats. The gang spared no expense in recruiting Jianghu masters to settle in Ba, and the situation gradually became chaotic. Chapter 964. On New Year's Eve and the morning of New Year's Day, people in the ancient city of Chang and stayed up all night to celebrate the New Year. Colorful lanterns were hung everywhere in Chang, and dragons and lions were dancing. Firecrackers were set off to ward off evil spirits, and paper money was burned to offer sacrifices to their ancestors. It was a lively scene everywhere. Ba was even more lively than Chang, and because more than half of the people here were single men without families, they could not stay up all night with their families during the New Year's Day. Naturally, they would go to the taverns with their friends to celebrate the New Year together. In a small tavern, Yang Fan, Ranwei, Abdullah, and Abbas sat at a table in the innermost part of the tavern. Originally, Ranwei and Abbas did not dare to sit, but in such a small tavern, it would be too much of an eyesore if someone stood beside them to wait on them, so they could only sit. Abdullah frowned and looked at the bustling scene in the tavern. He said loudly to Yang Fan, "You and I are so comfortable in the inn. Why do we have to come here?" His voice could not be less loud. There were people setting off firecrackers on the street outside the tavern. They were the kind of firecrackers with saltpeter added. They were loud and bright, and when they were set off, thick smoke billowed. The tavern was full. There were people singing drinking games, talking and laughing loudly. If he did not shout, Yang Fan would not be able to hear him. Even if he spoke loudly, he had to be in someone else's ears. Yang Fan, who still had a big beard on his chin, said loudly in his ear, "It's so lively here. This is a grand festival for the people of the Eastern Land. You and I don't have families here. What's the point of hiding in the lonely inn? It's better here, ha." The government had been sealed, and the officials had gone to celebrate the New Year. That night, Yang Fan disguised himself and went to Ba again. Abdullah shook his head. He did not think much of this Eastern carnival. He approached Yang Fan and asked loudly, How's the preparation on your side? Yang Fan said, The dry wood has been set up, and even the oil has been poured on it. Everything is ready. How is it on your side? The firecrackers outside the door caused a cloud of choking smoke to roll into the tavern. Abdullah coughed and waved his sleeves to fan the smoke away. He said to Yang Fan, What else can I do? I've already tied the camel's hooves to the grill. Now, as long as there's a spark, Mother Asterisker, your Three Rivers gang is too arrogant. If it wasn't for the new year, I would have crushed your balls. Bulsh asterisk T. Do you think we, the brothers of the Three River gang, are afraid of you? Come, as long as you dare to come. Next year's New Year's Eve will be your death anniversary. Before Abdullah could finish a sentence, the guests at the two tables beside him, whose faces were flushed from drinking, started to quarrel. Abdullah had just turned his head when he saw cups, plates, bowls, and chopsticks flying. Two square tables were flipped into the air. Two groups of men pounced on them and started punching and kicking them. The entire tavern was in an uproar. Soon, the other gangs that belonged to the Eastern and Western alliances joined in the fight. This time, all the tables and chairs were thrown into the air. Ran Wei had already stood up and caught a table that had been kicked over and placed it in front of him. Although a boss had a sharp tongue and did not seem to be good at martial arts, he also jumped up and loyally stood in front of his master to protect him. The gang fight in the tavern soon spread to the streets. The disciples of various sects who were strolling in the streets for the new year joined in the fight. Some of them had no idea what was going on, nor did they know where the main battlefield was. They only knew that their own people were fighting with their enemies, so they pounced on the enemies who were walking toward them. Chaos quickly spread throughout the entire Ba. The owner of the tavern didn't move. He stood firmly behind the counter and shouted, We, the Wei River Gang, are not part of the Southeast Asian Alliance or the Western Alliance. We mind our own business and mind our own business. You've borrowed my place to settle your grievances. You've ruined my business and destroyed my property. Please compensate me for the losses. Yang Fan smiled at Abdullah and said, Look, there are plenty of sparks. Do you still need to look for them? Abdullah's expression froze, and he said in a low voice, Are you ready to fight? Yang Fan's gaze slowly shifted outwards. The people fighting in the tavern had already joined the crowd on the streets. Countless people were waving their fists, punching and kicking each other. Some people were hugging each other and wrestling on the ground. Their clothes were torn and messy, and their faces were bruised and swollen. But they did not know why they were fighting. Yang Fan said, From now until the Lantern Festival, the government will be closed and sealed off. During this time, we can let Ba cause a ruckus. After the 15th of the first month, they won't have the chance to be in the limelight. Abdullah took a deep breath and said, When do we start? Yang Fan said, Tomorrow. Today is New Year's Eve. It's a good day. It's better not to see blood. As Yang Fan spoke, he stood up and walked out. Abdullah asked, Where are you going? Without looking back, Yang Fan waved his hand and said, I'm looking for someone to stay up on New Year's Eve. The street was still a chaotic battlefield of scuffles. Yang Fan was like a loach, burrowing into the crowd and disappearing in a few moments. Abdullah grabbed his beard and struggled for a long time. Finally, he let out a long sigh and muttered to himself, I'm also looking for someone to stay up on New Year's Eve. Today was New Year's Eve, and the 5th day was the 66th birthday of Old Master Qin of the Five Elements Guild, Qin Zian. The Qin family celebrated this year's New Year's Eve especially grand. San Lang Jun, who had stayed in Yangzhou for a long time, also brought his wife and children back to Ba to celebrate the New Year's Eve and celebrate the old master's birthday. The whole family sat around the stove on Sun Qinghuan's knees. Old Master Qin, who had worked hard for half his life, felt very satisfied. As long as this happened every year, he would have nothing else to ask for in this life. His children and grandchildren were very filial. They were very careful in front of him and said things to make him happy. Old Master Qin was very comforted. During this time, the family's steward secretly reported that the gangs of the Eastern and Western Leagues were fighting on the streets again. The whole town was in chaos, and many disciples of the Five Elements Guild were injured. Qin Dalong suppressed this news and said, "Today is New Year's Eve. We have to make the old master happy. Even if the sky falls down, we have to deal with it tomorrow." Qin Ziyuan was already in his 60s and did not have much energy. Although he said he was staying up on New Year's Eve, how could he not take a nap? When it was almost midnight, old Master Qin felt a little tired. He was about to ask his wife to help him rest when the vice steward hurriedly walked in. The sky did not fall down. He was only holding a visiting card in his hand. However, when Qin Dalong took it and looked at it, his expression suddenly changed. He immediately rushed over and whispered a few words in his father's ear. There were no words at the place where the visiting card was signed. There was only a picture, a very strange picture. It looked like a boat, but also like a fish on the top of the waves. Qin Ziyuan's expression turned solemn, and he said in a deep voice, "Bring him in through the corner door. Father will wait for him in the study." The person was brought into the study. This person was tall and well-built. He was wearing a black bell that covered him from head to toe. There was a bonnet on the collar of the robe that covered his head. When his head was lowered, it was impossible to see his face clearly. When this person entered the study, he lifted his hand and took off the bonnet. Qin Ziyuan, who was hurriedly walking over, was instantly dumbfounded. He recognized this person because this person had once come to his door to sell him some petite and charming maidens. This person was the Arab merchant who had booked an inn in the town. If he had not already checked the visiting card and confirmed that there was no mistake with the secret seal, Qin Ziyuan would not dare to believe his eyes. He composed himself and exclaimed, You are here on young master's orders? Young master is truly resourceful. He actually, Abdullah smiled faintly and continued, Even who like me can be used by him, is that so? Qin Ziyuan was slightly embarrassed and hurriedly said, I didn't know that Mr. Abdullah was one of us. If I have offended you, please forgive me. Does young master have any orders for Mr. Abdullah to come tonight? Five Elements Association. Qin Ziyuan, a member of the hidden sect. Currently, the profits from the water transport business were not attractive to the aristocratic families. Based on their connections and abundant capital, they had plenty of profitable businesses to do. However, Shinmu cared. Shinmu started from a humble background. In order to fight against the obvious sect, which was much larger than him, he would not give up on any power that could be won over or used, even if it was just a little. Thus, no one knew that the hidden sect had secretly planted an ambush at the water transport port. Back then, Shanmu supported the Five Elemental Association because he wanted to develop a new source of income. He also wanted to use the Five Elemental Association to recruit various heroes for his own use. When the hidden sect gradually grew stronger, Shinmu no longer cared about the Five Elemental Association's benefits. From then on, he rarely gave any orders to the Five Elemental Association. It was until the last food war in Chang, and that the obvious sect and the hidden sect started. To the hidden sect, the Five Elements Association, which was tasteless and a pity to abandon, played an unexpected role. Back then, in order to defeat young Master Jiang, Shinmu not only used all his stored rations, but he also borrowed a large amount of rations from the Li clan, Guo clan, and other aristocratic families in Shandong who supported him. He even used some corrupt officials to extort from them. However, even if the rations were obtained, they wouldn't be of any use unless they were transported to Chang'an. Back then, the Five Elements Association played an important role. This time, what was Shinmu going to use the Five Elements Association for? After Abdullah sat down, he slowly said, Recently many things happened in Ba, and I am here for this matter. Qin Ziyuan was surprised and asked, Young master already knows what happened here. Abdullah smiled slyly and said, He already knew what happened here before it happened. Qin Ziyuan pondered for a moment, and his old eyes instantly burst out with two rays of brilliance. Could it be the rise of the smooth sect is young master's doing? Abdullah said, although it's not accurate, it's not far. Qin Ziyuan was astonished. How can this be? What is young master trying to do? Abdullah smiled wholeheartedly and said, This is the reason why I am looking for you tonight. Chapter 965. Abdullah had sold a great deal of jewels, spices, carpets, and slave girls, but he had bought a great deal of oriental goods, porcelain, silk, and the like, which were very delicate, and so he continued to rent the whole inn. Abdullah had servants to serve him, and even his food was cooked by himself. The innkeeper was happy and relaxed. During the new year, the waiters were on leave, and the innkeeper's family returned to the city for the new year. The entire inn was left to Abdullah, and it became his home. A long string of red lanterns was hung in front of the inn, and many firecrackers were piled up. There were even dozens of boxes of fireworks on Ba, which ordinary people were reluctant to buy. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, and let his entourage of warriors celebrate the Tang people's festival. The pole of the inn was very tall, and the string of red lanterns was very long. There were lights everywhere on Ba, but this string of lanterns was not particularly eye-catching. But Gu Zhuting saw it, and so she quietly came in amidst the sound of firecrackers. It was the same room that Yang Fan used to stay in. There was wine and food on the low table in the room. Yang Fan sat cross-legged. The door opened, and a delicate deerskin boot entered first. Gu Zhuting walked in lightly, and took off the warm cover of Zhao Jun with air on her head. She said cheerfully, Lang summoned you. Are you going to fight? There was a small red clay stove in front of the table, and wine was warming on the stove, and the fragrance of the wine filled the air. When Yang Fan saw her, he smiled and pointed to the opposite side, saying, Come, sit down and talk. Gu Zhuting hesitated, but did not walk to the opposite side of the low table. Instead, she walked slowly to the side of the bed, bent down, and took off her boots, leaving only a pair of snow-white stockings. She sat cross-legged on the bed and gently leaned against Yang Fan's body. Her bright cheeks seemed to be illuminated by the fire in the stove, and a faint blush appeared. Yang Fan was slightly surprised. He did not know how much courage she had to muster to make such a bold move. Yang Fan could not help but hold her hand and said, Let's not talk about other things first. This is the end of the year and also the beginning of the year. How about you and I stay up together? Of course. Hearing Yang Fan's words, Gu Zhuting's eyes were as bright as the fireworks outside the window. She was a woman who was easily satisfied. This year's New Year's Eve was destined to be the most unforgettable New Year's Eve of her life. When Yang Fan woke up, he heard the sound of firecrackers. It was the morning of the first day of the new year. His head was dizzy, his mouth and tongue were somewhat dry. Only now did he realize that it was New Year's Eve. He had failed to keep watch on New Year's Eve, and he was completely drunk. Yang Fan, who had just woken up from his hangover, vaguely remembered that he and Gu Zhuting drank to their heart's content last night. It was fine at first, but later on, when he was drunk, he told her many stories of the past. He told her about how, by a freak combination of factors, he mixed into the imperial court, and how he wanted to achieve great things after he took up his position. He also talked about women. He mentioned Xiaoman, Anu, and Wan'er. Finally, he talked about Ning, who died early. He remembered that at that time his face was full of tears, and he drank faster and faster. Gu Zhuting was like a gentle elder sister, comforting him softly. He remembered that he staggered to stand up and wanted to raise his glass to Ning's soul. Then he fell down. It was Gu Zhuting who dragged him to the bed. She seemed to be using his arm as a pillow. She lay with him for a long time and talked for a long time. Yang Fan gradually regained consciousness. He turned his head and saw that the animal charcoal in the brazier was still flickering. He was still wearing his clothes. He was wrapped in a Persian blanket that was as soft as a feather, and there was a thick quilt on top. The quilt was very warm, but the tip of his nose was a little cold. Yang Fan took out his hand and touched his nose. There was still a lingering fragrance on his hand, a wisp of a woman's fragrance. Yang Fan lay in a daze for a while. Then he sat up, grabbed the kettle from the table, and drank a few mouthfuls of water to moisten his throat. Then he lifted the quilt and put on his boots. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he staggered, and the feeling of dizziness did not disappear. Yang Fan touched his dizzy head and opened the door. He saw Ren Wei standing outside, dressed in new clothes. Behind him was a row of sword-like icicles under the eaves. Ren Wei grinned, showing his white teeth. He cupped his hands to Yang Fan and said with a smile, "Ah Lang, you have a new life, and your longevity has been extended." Yang Fan blinked his eyes and then reacted. He hurriedly cupped his hands to return the salute. "Everything will be smooth and good luck will come." Several guards who were in the courtyard heard the commotion and rushed over to greet Ah Lang. Yang Fan cupped his hands in front of his chest and repeatedly returned the salute. "Everything will be smooth and good luck will come." Because he was drunk last night, he did not untie his hair and did not comb his hair in the morning. Now the bun was tilted to one side. Coupled with his cupped hands in front of his chest, he looked like a little squirrel holding a pine cone and nodding its head. After the New Year's greetings were exchanged, Ren Wei held back his laughter and said, "Ah Lang, your bun." Yang Fan touched his head and exclaimed, "Boil some hot water for me." Just as Yang Fan was about to turn around and return to his room, a figure flashed by the door. It was Abdullah, leading his little attendant Abbas in high spirits. Both master and servant were wearing new clothes and hats. As soon as they saw Yang Fan, they laughed loudly from afar and said, "Everything will be smooth and good luck will come." Yang Fan was startled. His auspicious phrase was snatched away by Abdullah. Yang Fan first cupped his hands in front of his chest and then thought of a phrase, "Congratulations on making a fortune. Congratulations on making a fortune." Just as he said this, he heard commotion outside the east wall. Someone was speaking in an intense tone, as if loudly complaining about something. Someone else's voice was angry, as if constantly cursing, accompanied by the sound of hurried footsteps of a large group of people passing through the alley. Standing in the courtyard, one could see a scene of sticks and spears flashing across the top of the wall. Yang Fan had just woken up from his hangover, and his mind was not very agile. He stared blankly at the chaotic scene outside and asked in surprise, "What's going on?" Abdullah turned his head to look at the main culprit and asked curiously, "Didn't you say that it's going to start today?" Yang Fan's words before he was drunk caused Ba to be restless for the whole night. The chaos on New Year's Eve lasted until the third watch before it gradually calmed down. At this time, Gu Zhuting had just settled the drunk Yang Fan and returned to the Shun Gate. As soon as Gu Zhuting returned to the Shun Gate, she summoned her 3 elder brothers who were drinking with Zhuo Yiqing and the others around the stove and gave them some detailed instructions. At the Qin Fu, Abdullah quietly left through the corner door. Qin Ziyuan immediately summoned his eldest son and his trusted chief, steward, into the study. The 3 of them discussed in secret for a long time before the 2 of them left. Qin Ziyuan then summoned a concubine to serve him on a small couch in the study to rest. Qin Ziyuan's concubine had received instructions from the old master beforehand to wake him up at the 5th watch, so she did not dare to sleep at all. She only leaned against the head of the bed and pretended to sleep. At the 5th watch, the sound of firecrackers could be heard on the street. The concubine immediately woke the old master up and helped him wash up and change his clothes. Qin Ziyuan had finished washing up and was dressed neatly. The chief steward immediately rushed over to help him up and reported something in detail along the way. Afterwards, Qin Ziyuan rushed to the main hall. The entire Fu from top to bottom entered the hall one by one according to the order of sons, daughters-in-law, grandchildren, stewards, accountants, servants, and maids, and kowtowed to the old master to wish him a happy new year. Afterwards, the whole family ate breakfast, drank 2 su wine, ate steamed cakes, popcorn, gelatin, spring cakes, and so on. Then they opened the Fu's doors to receive their relatives and friends who had come to wish them a happy new year. The leader of the Chuan gang was the first to come to wish Old Master Qin a happy new year. Old Master Qin personally went to the gate to welcome him. But unexpectedly, he was assassinated in front of the Fu's mansion. The assassin was extremely skillful. Fortunately, the major gangs in Ba had been hiring highly skilled Jianghu masters to help them these days. Old Master Qin and third brother, the leader of the Chuan gang, each had 2 highly skilled bodyguards. They acted in time, and the assassin only injured one of Old Master Qin's arms, and then escaped. Almost at the same time, gang leader Qiao of the Shun gang was assassinated on the Long Street. Gang leader Qiao was going to pay a Happy New Year visit to Huang Yunshan, the leader of the Sanhe gang. The Shun gang was now an ally of the Life League and the Sanhe gang. Among the 3 major gangs, Huang Yunshan of the Sanhe gang was the oldest and the most senior. Unexpectedly, Qiao Mu encountered an assassin in full view of the public when he was halfway there. The disciples protected Qiao Mu as they fought and retreated. On the bloody Long Street, they happened to run into the people of the Life League, who were also here to pay a Happy New Year visit to Huang Yunshan. They joined the fight in time, and after losing a few good fighters, the assassin retreated. On the side of the West Alliance, because Old Master Qin was injured, the 5-Element Association was furious. The leader of the Chuan gang, who happened to be there, also felt a lingering fear and flew into a rage out of shame. The 2 of them immediately informed the Taiping gang, who were also their allies, about the situation. They sharpened their swords and were ready to fight back with blood. On the side of the ASEAN, because the leader of the Shun gang was assassinated, the Life League also lost a few good fighters. The leaders of the 2 gangs were also assassinated on the way to pay a Happy New Year visit to Huang Yunshan of the Sanhe gang. Huang Yunshan was also furious when he heard the news. He immediately visited Qiao Mu and the Life League in person and deployed his troops, intending to pay a tooth for a tooth. The riot last night lasted until the 3rd night watch period. At this time it was just dawn. The disciples who participated in the gang fight had not calmed down yet. When they heard that their leaders were assassinated again, the contradictions and hatred accumulated by the constant friction between the 2 sides finally went out of control. If someone had been paying attention to the movements of the big gangs on Ba and the actions of the imperial envoys of the Ministry of Justice and the censorate in the city, he would have noticed a very strange phenomenon. There seemed to be a very strange connection between the 2 sides, which were completely unrelated. Some of the actions they took were always in coordination with each other. If this could be considered a coincidence, then today was undoubtedly another one. When the 2 major gangs of Ba's alliance had triggered a grand armed melee due to the assassination attempt, the Ministry of Justice and the censorate had immediately taken action. Early in the morning, on the first day of the first lunar month, Lu Chechen was wearing a dark red, purple silk robe with 5 birthday flowers on it. He sat in the main seat in the main hall with a ruddy face. His family members came forward one by one to kowtow to Alang and give him a New Year's greeting. When his 6th concubine came forward with his little daughter, who had just turned 1 year old, to greet him, the little girl said the auspicious words her mother taught her in a childish voice. "Daddy, the new year is auspicious, and your future is boundless." Lu Chechen beamed with joy. He opened his arms and was about to hug his daughter affectionately. Suddenly, the housekeeper ran in breathlessly and reported that Hu Yuanli of the censorate and Qin Dong of the Ministry of Justice had come to visit. Lu Chechen was very surprised. So early in the morning, these 2 were even more enthusiastic than the officials who came to pay a Happy New Year visit.